Welcome back to the Career Profiles podcast. I'm your host, Sean, and this is part 4, the final part of the life and career profile of Floyd Patterson. And so far we've gone through parts 1, 2 and 3 covering his early beginnings, how he got into the sport, his relationship and subsequent breakdown with Cus D'Amato, him becoming the world heavyweight champion at 21 years of age, his trilogy with Ingemar Johansson, and now we're up to the part where we're just about to get into the fights with Sonny Liston, and this episode will cover that and the rest of his career and things that he also did outside of the ring in what will be another bumper episode. Now, the last episode was at 2 hours 40 minutes. This episode, very, very similar, and I know I wanted to split this up into more manageable chunks. However, I didn't want to extend past 4 parts per career profile for each individual because I felt like it would go on for way, way too long. So we're sticking to 4 parts per individual, which is why parts 3 and parts 4 are surplus 2 hours. I hope that's okay for you guys, and please do let me know if that isn't, or if it's too much, and if I do need to break it down into maybe 5, 6 parts per career profile on each individual that I cover. Thank you so much as well for all the comments on Spotify. Thank you so much for leaving ratings and reviews. Continue to do so. If you're a long-time listener and you haven't already done that, I implore you to please go and leave a rating and review on Apple or on Spotify, or if you're on a different podcast app that does have that system in place, please do it because all of it counts. It is a virtual word of mouth. You being able to praise what we're doing and giving us credit for everything that we're putting together and getting it out there to the individuals that haven't already heard our content and all the stuff that we do on the BTR Boxing Podcast Network. So please continue to do that. Thank you to those on YouTube as well that persevere by listening to the audio that I do upload, because YouTube essentially is for videos, but so that those guys don't miss out, I do upload it to there as well, the audio version with an overlay that I create, just so people that do subscribe via YouTube can listen to that also. Well, introductions aside, it's time to go back to the story and dive back into the final part of Floyd Patterson's career profile. Now, as I said, we left it at the end where Sonny Liston, he was the logical contender. It was always debated whether Floyd really wanted the fight. It is quite well known and quite well publicised that Cus D'Amato had influences and he didn't want that fight for Floyd Patterson. However, at this point, of course, he's lost rank, Cus D'Amato, in the Patterson camp, and the relationship has begun to strain massively. So as we jump into the episode, Floyd himself said he'd hoped that the fight with Sonny Liston would occur in the summer. And Red Smith commented about this. He said, "The mere fact that there is going to be a fight shows how Cus D'Amato has lost rank, for Cus wanted no part of Liston." But D'Amato wasn't quite out of the picture entirely. In fact, Patterson still sometimes referred to him as his manager. In announcing the fight, Patterson said that he and D'Amato would choose the location, which most likely would not be New York City. There was another matter for Patterson to deal with that spring before he could turn his full attention on Liston, and that was his autobiography, Completing Victory Over Myself. It had been a painstaking task for him. Milton Gross had polished the final manuscript, and he presented it to Floyd, who read it carefully, and then passed it on to Julius November, and then finally to Sandra. Gross, Patterson and November then set up a marathon session in a Midtown hotel suite and went over the manuscript page by page, with Patterson referring to a list of corrections he'd made on the back of an envelope. November suggested removing material about Floyd's complicated relationship with Cus D'Amato, but Patterson insisted that it remain. And he said, "He's part of my life. He's got to be in." Patterson also wanted the book to sound like him, and Gross rewrote passages the way Patterson would actually phrase them. When the writing was complete, Gross thought that he and Patterson had accomplished something special. He said, "This is a story of a boy who's mentally disturbed, who runs from his friends, who finds the only identity he's ever known in the violence of the prize ring." Tennessee Williams could play with a theme like this, he added. "This is not a sports story or a boxing story. This is the story of a man." The story of a man was picked up by Sports Illustrated, which serialised it starting in May 1962. Sections of the book were published in newspapers as well. Bernard Geiss personally obtained permission from the White House to use one of the photos of Patterson with President Kennedy on the dust jacket. Thus adorned, the book had its official coming out party at Toots Shaw's salon on May 25th. Geiss and Sports Illustrated co-sponsored the publication party, which required attendees to purchase a $50 ticket for admission, with Wiltwyck as the beneficiary. Victory Over Myself received accolades as soon as it hit the shelves, and from some unlikely corners. The poet, Marianne Moore, said, "I regard it as a manual for descriptive writing, how to exhibit yourself without repelling the reader. I read the book very carefully and annotated it at the back. It was delicately done." In his New York Times review of the book, Gay Talese praised it in part because of what it wasn't, another sweaty thriller about the kid from the slums who slugs his way to the top to reign in hamburger heaven. In the Los Angeles Times, influential sports columnist Jim Murray called Victory Over Myself a remarkable book, adding, "It's a fascinating insight into essentially sad and gentle human being which lifts it above the realm of a sports book, and it is a testimony of human spirit which would probably do more good, if read, than all the sermons you and I will hear today or this year." If it fell short of the blockbuster status of other Geiss titles, it nonetheless proved popular enough and was translated for several foreign editions. But the book's release, along with the White House visit and the trip to Egypt, distracted Patterson from his primary business at hand. That was to prepare for the fight for Sonny Liston. A win over Liston would require more from Patterson physically and emotionally than any other previous fight, more even than the second Johansson fight. Yet Floyd took time away from training to attend to matters surrounding the book's publication. Family concerns were also diverting his focus. When Milton Gross visited the Highland Mills training camp, Floyd blurted out to him, "My daughter, Sanika, is 6 years old, and I don't know her." The comment surprised Gross. If Floyd didn't know his oldest child, he was certainly a stranger to the others. Floyd had painted a rosy picture of his relationship with his wife and kids in Victory Over Myself. In fact, his marriage was deteriorating even as the size of his family increased. In addition to his 2 daughters and Floyd Jr., he now had another son, Eric. Gross asked whether Patterson was contemplating retirement in order to devote more time to his family. Patterson admitted that his wife had been demanding he spend more time at home, but he assured Gross that retirement wasn't on his mind. Floyd explained that before he met Sandra, he had fallen in love with boxing, and boxing was his first love. Floyd didn't want to give it up, not the one thing he could do best in life. The implication was clear. If it came down to it, he'd choose boxing over his wife and children. How painful that decision might be, especially for a man who embraced the Catholic Church's teachings on honouring marriage and family. There was a further complication that would also affect the Pattersons' family life. As heavyweight champion, Floyd received thousands of letters and had relied on an assistant to help with his correspondence and other business matters. When his secretary married and left the job, Floyd asked his close friend, the singer Mickey Allen, if he knew someone who could replace her. Allen recommended his sister-in-law, Janet Sequist. The attractive blonde proved to be efficient, and she showed an interest in Floyd's career and business dealings. Over time, she and Floyd grew closer. The Patterson family residence only added to the problems on the home front. Floyd and his family had moved to an upscale neighbourhood on Troublesome Brook in northern-eastern Yonkers near the town's border with Scarsdale. Until their arrival, the neighbourhood had been inhabited exclusively by white people. The name of the brook turned out to be prophetic. The newcomers did not receive a warm welcome. The Pattersons' next-door neighbour was a dentist. He built a redwood fence along the property line, dividing the backyards of the 2 houses. Floyd was certain his neighbour built the fence to keep the family's children from playing together. On a visit home from training camp, Floyd responded by hiring workmen to construct a fence between the front yards of the 2 homes. When construction began, the dentist's wife faced off with the workmen and Floyd in the front yard. Later in the day, The dentist himself threatened Patterson with a lawsuit if the fence builders touched anything in his yard. Patterson replied that if the dentist touched anything in his yard, you better have an ambulance waiting. Yet a further distraction for Floyd in the weeks leading up to the Liston fight was a business deal he'd entered at Cus D'Amato's urging. In 1959, D'Amato had met handball champion Jim Jacobs. Jacobs had amassed a collection of fight films, the sheer size of which, as in 5,000 films, made him a somebody in the world of boxing. He and D'Amato hit it off quickly and became tight friends and eventually roommates. In 1962, Cus encouraged Floyd to participate in a project that Jacobs had concocted. Jacobs would produce a 1-hour retrospective about Patterson's career that Jacobs would syndicate to television stations. Floyd would receive a fee for interviews and a percentage of the profits. Patterson entered into an oral agreement with Jacobs. The actual letters of agreement were signed by D'Amato. The fee Floyd received for the interviews was $1, according to the letters D'Amato signed. After expenses were settled, there was no profit, or at least that was what Jacobs told Patterson. Floyd made nothing out of this deal. Cus couldn't give away those rights to my life in 1962. Only I could do that, or only I should have been able to do that, Patterson later said. And it wasn't what Jacobs promised me. No percentage of what the film made. No fees, nothing. Who knows what that film made? Jacobs had the records. For Floyd, it was the last straw. Cus still had a written contract in place with Patterson that gave him a percentage of Floyd's purses. But after the Jacobs incident, Floyd was ready to part company with D'Amato for good. It all made for a bad state of mind for Patterson as he readied himself to face a man considered the most dangerous heavyweight the sport had known. One thing was certain about Sonny Liston: he never kissed anyone in the ring. It was in his family's Cyprus board shack that Charles Sonny Liston came into the world. The boxing publicist and promoter Harold Conrad once said of Liston, "I think he died the day he was born." Now, I'm not going to go deep on Sonny Liston's career because we have done a career profile on him. So please, if you haven't heard it, go back and listen to Sonny Liston's career profile. You can hear the tale of Cassius Clay and Sonny Liston. You can listen to Sonny Liston's Darker Side of Boxing episode. So I'm going to move forward a little bit into Liston's career now. And in 1959 and 1960, however, he carried his campaign of annihilation to the best contenders in the heavyweight division. They all learnt that Liston was a tremendously talented heavyweight with extraordinary reach, devastating power and hands so large that he required custom-made gloves. Liston could knock someone out with a single jab. His punching ability was so overwhelming that most fight spectators failed to note that he had also mastered all the technical intricacies of a top-flight boxer. He possessed outstanding footwork. No boxer in history could cut off a ring better than Liston in his prime. Sonny stood 6 feet and typically went into the ring weighing between 210 and 220 pounds, yet he had a way of gliding across the canvas as if he was skating on ice. Once he appeared on the Ed Sullivan television show and jumped rope to the accompaniment of his favourite song, Night Train. His feet as deft as a modern dancer's. When D'Amato was in complete control of Patterson's career, Sonny had no chance to challenge for the heavyweight crown, which of course frustrated Liston and his handlers to no end. Liston would never part company with his mob connections. Sonny actually confronted Cus D'Amato in a surprise visit to Cus's office. The enraged heavyweight towered over D'Amato, demanding to know if he'd ever be allowed a shot at Patterson's title. It took a moment or two for D'Amato to compose himself before telling Liston it would be possible once Liston made a management change, meaning once Liston aligned himself with a manager and a trainer who had no organised crime connections. D'Amato knew that wasn't about to happen and watched as Liston stormed away. Even as people in the boxing world called Liston a menace, a thug, and, in their words, a bad nigger, Floyd regarded Sonny differently. Patterson saw much of himself in Liston. Floyd believed he could have ended up just like him, threatened by cops, doing time in prison, answering to gangsters, if life hadn't provided him opportunities that Liston never received. But Patterson also knew he was going to have to put together the best performance of his career if he was to defeat this challenge to his crown on September 25th, 1962 at Chicago's Comiskey Park. Patterson-Liston was set to be a huge heavyweight championship bout. There was no two ways about it. Promoters planned to reconfigure seating in Comiskey Park so that the venerable stadium could accommodate 57,000 fans. Transforming the baseball palace of the world into a boxing venue would be a chore. The White Sox would finish their season there just 2 days before September the 25th bout. Tickets went on sale for between $10 and $100. The promoters predicted the fight would earn substantially in excess of $6 million, which they proclaimed would make it the greatest fight in history. Patterson was guaranteed 45% of the net live gate and 55% of the ancillary income, including money from closed circuit and broadcast rights. Liston had to yield a lot of money for his shot at the title. He would receive just 12.5% of the live gate and 12.5% of the ancillary income, both against guarantees of $200,000. Well, that was fine with him. I don't care where or how much, he said, just as long as we fight. Once the contracts were signed, the boxers set up their respective training camps. Patterson chose Elgin, Illinois, somewhat hidden from the media glare. 6 years earlier, Patterson had trained at Sportsman's Park racetrack to prepare for his only other pro match in Chicago, the fight in which he defeated Archie Moore to become the heavyweight champ. Perhaps ominously, Liston chose to train at Aurora Downs, an abandoned racetrack that was even more run down than Sportsman's Park had been. Patterson's camp in Elgin was typical of other camps. The atmosphere was friendly, and Patterson attempted to answer reporters' questions as best he could. Liston's camp was more like a reverse prison. It had barbed wire and an armed guard posted to keep people out. As Patterson and Liston worked out at the training camps, publicist Harold Conrad began his job in Chicago, generating hype. No one could do a better job of that when he came to big-time boxing events. Conrad realised that the Patterson-Liston battle was weighted with sociological and political implications, not the least of which was that Patterson was going against President Kennedy, his political hero, by agreeing to the bout. But Patterson believed fair play trumped even presidential requests, that Liston had earned the right to fight for the crown. Floyd could see no reason to deny Liston. The fight had captured the fancy of many Americans, making it the most talked about heavyweight bout since Joe Louis and Max Schmeling in the 1930s, and Dempsey and Tudor in the 1920s. But this fight was different in one very important respect. Both Patterson and Liston were African American. No event in American history, in or out of sports, had focused so much attention on an event in which the leading players were black. Conrad knew writers would be attracted by everything the clash between Floyd and Sonny symbolised, not just the sports reporters, who would be there anyway, but big-name literary writers. Conrad was right. Prize-winning novelist and highbrow essayist elbowed their way into Chicago's Sheraton Hotel, the fight headquarters where they joined the sports writers in churning out fight-related verbiage at the rate of 10,000 words a minute. And that was in the words of Norman Mailer, one of the authors who'd actually come to town for the fight. Liston may have had little use for white reporters. After all, some columnists had referred to him as a gorilla. But one white writer did get to sit down with him. Edwin Bud Sharrock, a Dallas Morning News sports columnist, didn't press Liston about his inner feelings. Instead, Shrake asked Liston about Patterson's speed. Shrake shared with Liston that there was some belief that Patterson would be able to cut up Liston with his fast punches and that Liston would be too slow to lay a solid blow on Floyd. Liston, trademark glare firmly in place, suddenly shot one of his huge hands into the air, then brought it back, his fingers clenched into a fist. Liston slowly opened his fist in front of Shrake's face to reveal that he'd just captured a fly in flight. "Do you think that'll be fast enough to take care of that skinny-ass son of a bitch?" Liston growled. Shrake left the interview a Liston believer. Many boxing insiders held out for Patterson. Never mind the odds. Daniel M. Daniel, writing for the Ring magazine, said, "They will fight, and I will be surprised if Patterson does not beat him." The Cinderella Man, James J. Braddock, also liked Patterson in spite of what the bookmakers were procrastinating. "I have news for you. Being an underdog makes you a better fighter. Patterson is most dangerous when least is looked for from him. Braddock predicted a decision in favour of Floyd, with Patterson controlling the final rounds of the bout. The crusty old fight manager Jack Kearns saw Patterson winning, as did former heavyweight champ Ezard Charles and one-time Floyd foe Archie Moore. Ingemar Johansson seemed torn. He said, "I am confused. In Sweden, I picked Liston, and in a magazine, Patterson. Now I don't know." Partying at the Chicago Playboy Club, Mailer and New York Post columnist and Patterson confidant Pete Hamill agreed that Floyd would win the fight. Both men thought that Patterson would claim victory during the 6th round. Mailer said, "I think Liston is going to have Patterson down 2, 3, 4 times, and Patterson will have Liston down in the 1st, 2nd or 3rd and end it with one punch in the 6th. But Mailer also understood that Patterson would carry into the ring a burden quite unlike anything any other fighter had endured. Patterson was a churchgoer, a Catholic convert, and the biggest thing he had was his pride. Pride, as both Baldwin and Mailer talked about more than anything. It was everything on the line for Floyd as he went to Comiskey Park. The members of his team actually argued with officials about Liston's custom-made gloves. They weighed the prescribed 8 ounces, but there was little padding over the knuckles, making them a dangerous knockout tool. But Patterson was more concerned about letting all those people down who had done so much for him over the years. Living up to their expectations of him in the ring was his pride. As he sat in the dressing room, he drifted into what he later described as a kind of blindness. It was apparent to people in the room with him that something wasn't right. Joseph Trina, chairman of the Illinois State Athletic Commission, said that Patterson turned to ice in those minutes before he left for the ring. It was in that frozen blindness that Patterson climbed between the ropes in Comiskey Park. He heard his longtime friend Mickey Allen sing the Star-Spangled Banner. He heard Liston loudly booed when he was introduced as the challenger. He heard his own name cheered when he was introduced as champion. As always, Patterson stared downwards as the referee read the fight instructions. Meanwhile, Liston glared at Patterson as if Floyd were responsible for every whipping delivered in the Delta cotton fields, every swollen knot rendered on the skull by some cracker St. Louis cop. During those opening seconds, Floyd was fluid, bouncing on the balls of his feet as usual, attempting to set up his left hook. But as the round progressed, Floyd planted his feet and tried to slug it out with Sonny up close. It was a huge mistake. Liston saw his opportunity and went on the attack. At around the 2-minute mark, Sonny battered Patterson to the ropes with lefts to the body and shoulders. Floyd reacted in a bizarre way. Rather than use his speed to escape from further punishment, Patterson stood up straight and allowed his left hand to slide down the top rope, leaving his head totally exposed, almost as if he was offering himself up as a sacrifice. No one who watched the fight knew just why he did this. Maybe Floyd himself didn't know. It gave Liston a chance to hit Floyd with a left and short right, neither particularly sharp, but both effective enough. Patterson was collapsing on himself when Liston slammed Floyd's undefended head once more, this time with a massive left hook. Floyd attempted to wobble back to his feet in vain. The fight was over, in near record time for a heavyweight championship bout. Baldwin, stunned, joined A.J. Liebling at a bar to mourn the very possible death of boxing and to have a drink with love for Floyd. The next morning, the traditional post-fight press conference turned into a farce as a soused Norman Mailer tried to upstage the new champ. Mailer, who'd been drinking steadily at the Playboy Club since the end of the fight, had determined that there should be a rematch. In grand Mailer style, he indicated that his cosmic understanding of what really transpired during the fight would allow him to turn such a contest into a multi-million-dollar success. He continued to believe Floyd was the better boxer. In the throes of spirits and lack of sleep, Mailer concocted a fantastic theory about why Patterson had lost. His theory? The Mafia had cast some sort of Sicilian evil eye on Patterson that caused him to surrender before the fight even began. Custy Amato, Mailer reasoned, was well schooled in matters such as warding off evil eyes. Patterson's mistake was that he distanced himself from D'Amato, thus making himself vulnerable to supernatural threats. After tolerating this lunatic for a few minutes, the police literally carried Mailer out of the room. Patterson saw none of it. By that time, he was closing in on New York. A week or so before the fight, promoter Al Bolan asked Harold Conrad if he knew the name of a good makeup artist in Chicago, because Floyd Patterson had requested one. Conrad contacted the Chicago CBS affiliate, where he had a friend who agreed to take care of whatever Patterson needed. Conrad made an appointment for Patterson to see the man. Later, the friend called Conrad and said, "What the hell's playing with Patterson? He asked my man to fix him up a beard." Conrad quickly figured that it was for a disguise. He swore the man at the TV station to secrecy about the affair, but he knew that Patterson was planning an escape from Chicago. In fact, Patterson had taken the fake beard and moustache he'd made prior to the second Johansson fight with him to Chicago. The moustache was still in good shape, but the beard had become somewhat unravelled. So he paid the makeup artist $65 and gave him a $50 ticket for the fight to make him a new beard. After he lost the fight, Floyd dispatched a trainer to the hotel to fetch his disguise. Just as he had for the second Johansson fight, Patterson had 2 cars waiting for him. One was the official one, his Lincoln, to be used to drive him back to the hotel if he won. The other was hidden away and pointed towards New York, just in case Patterson wanted to make a clandestine escape. Once he had the beard in hand, he fled with his friend Mickey Allen. His regular driver, Ernest Fowler, waited with the Lincoln for Patterson to show up. Because of that, reporters assumed Floyd was holed up somewhere in the stadium. Patterson and Allen's hurried drive was almost identical to the one he had made across the dark Midwest following his triumph over Archie Moore in Chicago almost 6 years earlier. Then he'd been hailed as the newly crowned champion on his way home to see his newborn daughter. But now he travelled in disgrace. The night was his friendly protector as Floyd sat behind the wheel, navigating the lonely highways. Other than Allen, no one knew what Patterson was up to that night. Not even his friends, not even his family. In fact, Floyd had told Sandra that he would pick her up at Chicago's Bismarck Hotel, and they would drive back to New York together. She learned about the change in plans only after he called her from a phone booth on the road to tell her to catch a plane home. Just before dawn, somewhere in Ohio, Patterson pulled the car off the road for a break. He stepped out to stretch his legs. Almost immediately, a state trooper pulled in behind them. Patterson quickly attempted to attach his beard disguise, but by the time the cop had reached him, he had secured only the moustache in place, and the beard hung loosely from his chin. Naturally, the trooper was suspicious and demanded to see Patterson's licence. Patterson stiffened up. His driver's licence was back in Chicago, still in the hotel with the rest of his personal effects. He did have the registration for the car, which he had borrowed from a relative, and he showed that to the trooper. "If you don't have a licence," the trooper said, "I've got to take you in." Not knowing what else to do, Patterson dislodged the moustache and beard to reveal himself for who he really was. At first, the trooper didn't recognise him and wondered aloud if he was an actor. Patterson removed the cap he was wearing, and the cop shined his flashlight into Floyd's face. Now it registered with him. "Aren't you?" he began. "Yes," said Patterson. "I lost a fight last night. Do I have to lose again? Wouldn't it be all right if I mail you my licence when I get home? I just forgot it." The trooper squeezed Patterson's shoulder in a friendly way and said, "You won't have to do that. You won't have to lose again. You'll get him next time." Patterson and Allen were free to go on the way. With Allen now driving, Patterson told him to head directly to the place where he felt most comfortable. Not his home in Yonkers, but the training camp in Highland Mills. After 22 hours on the road, he and Allen collapsed into sleep. The next morning, Floyd asked Allen to leave. Floyd wanted only solitude. He spent the day alone, mindlessly watching TV. He avoided the radio because he didn't want to hear any news reports about Liston. Late in the day, he went for a walk and wound up entering the gym on the property. Suddenly, he felt an overpowering desire to start training, but all his gear remained back in Chicago. So Floyd resumed his walk, chastising himself for throwing away all the training he'd done to prep for Liston in 2 minutes and 6 seconds. A few days after the fight, Patterson finally made the drive to Yonkers. He arrived wearing the moustache, having discarded the beard because it irritated his chin. Sandra scarcely recognised him. Floyd stayed for a short while to play with the kids, but then left to meet with Julius November, who had just flown in from Chicago. The two men discussed business and concluded that they should exercise Floyd's option for a rematch. It was all important to Floyd. He said, "I've got to prove myself that I'm a better fighter than I was that night." In fact, Patterson had plenty of self-doubt. Within a few days, he arrived at an airport ticket counter wearing a fake Betnick beard and carrying a suitcase. He peered up at the departure board and saw that a flight from Madrid was leaving soon. Madrid seemed to be as good as any place to escape, so he purchased a ticket for the Spanish capital. In Madrid, he booked himself into a hotel under Buster Watson's real name, Aaron Watson. He had decided to affect a limp to complement his disguise, so for the next few days he hobbled around the city's poorest neighbourhoods and took stock of the people who stared at him, this seemingly disabled black American with the odd beard. He was certain they thought he was insane. He allowed himself to eat only soup, a dish he hated because he considered it fit only for old men. Why did he do all this? Well, he later explained that it had to do with confronting a certain weakness that came out only when he was alone. He said, "And I've figured out that part of the reason I do the things I do and cannot seem to conquer that one word, myself, is because I am a coward." A coward in his own mind, perhaps, but he showed no cowardice as he agreed to a July 1963 rematch with the new heavyweight champion. And he showed no cowardice when he agreed to travel to the bloodied heart of American civil rights movement in May 1963 to lend support to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. King welcomed Patterson's backing, even as many of Patterson's own backers were beginning to abandon him. John Kennedy among them. After Liston beat Patterson, Floyd learned that the president threw away an autographed photo of Patterson he kept in the Oval Office. In the spring of 1963, King organised a protest campaign to break down the walls of segregation in Birmingham, Alabama. The city's police chief, Eugene Bull Connor, ordered that demonstrators were to be dispersed with fire hoses and vicious guard dogs. Americans outside the South registered horror as they watched TV news images of men, women and children knocked from their feet by water blast and attacked by snarling German shepherds. Officers arrested more than 2,000 demonstrators, half of whom were jailed. Jackie Robinson determined that something must be done about violence in Birmingham. He organised an emergency meeting of civil rights supporters to raise money for King's activities. The meeting took place at Sardi's in New York and was attended by leaders and celebrities alike, including actress Diane Carroll and Ruby Dee. Patterson did not attend the meeting in person, but he agreed to travel to Birmingham. A year earlier, Robinson and Patterson had travelled to Mississippi to champion rights for African Americans. Also on that trip was Archie Moore and Curt Flood of the St. Louis Cardinals. At a regional NAACP meeting in Jackson, Patterson spoke to 4,000 attendees and faulted himself for staying in the North while blacks in the South sacrificed personal safety while fighting for racial integration. He said, "I feel extremely guilty sitting there in the North, reading and hearing about the things you're going through down here. You people are the ones going through all the danger." In May 1963, Patterson was ready to head south once again, even if it meant breaking training camp fewer than 90 days before his return match with Liston. When asked by a WSB-TV reporter why he was going, Floyd echoed the sentiments he expressed a year earlier. "Well, sitting up here in my training camp, watching television and reading the newspapers, I felt I wasn't doing my job, or at least a share of it anyway. And then I heard that Jackie Robinson was going down and I thought it might be a good opportunity for me to go down with him. And when I go down there, I'm going down prepared to be arrested." The TV reporter asked Patterson what he would do if he was arrested, and Floyd responded that he would go to jail. What if they turned the fire hoses or attack dogs on him? The hose was okay, Patterson said, but an animal, it's a dog, see? I'm not used to standing by like the people in the South. who are much stronger than I am when it comes to this type of thing. I can't stand around and let an animal bite me, so I will have to do something." So Floyd went on his trip, and he returned home following an eventful few days. And now that trip was history for him, Floyd returned his focus to regaining his crown, and he said, "My chances of winning the title are good. The chances of my putting up a better fight are better. If I go down again, I will be able to get up proudly this time." Floyd believed the pressure would be on Liston this time. He said, "All that good guy versus bad guy stuff, everybody was pulling for me, and I felt it. That's over with now. Liston is the champion, and the weight is all on his shoulders this time. Now he has to make the fight." Sonny Liston was of a mind to make the fight. He had intended to carry himself as the world champion in much the same way that Joe Louis and Patterson had. But Liston was not treated to cheering crowds at airports or plaudits from politicians. His public image hardly improved after he became the champion. To the minds of most people, he remained some kind of dangerous beast. So Liston retreated in anger and boos. He was once asked if he'd planned to go south like Floyd to show support for the civil rights movement, and his famous response was, "I ain't got no dog-proof arse." Instead, he set his sights on crushing Patterson once more. The fight would take place in Las Vegas, and the location itself became one of the most significant things about the rematch. Where else but in that razzle-dazzle capital of Soccerland, wrote Bud Schulberg, could you fill a large hall for a rematch of the felling of an apprehensive, thoroughly rehabilitated delinquent by a very tough prison-hardened man? The second fight between Patterson and Liston was the first heavyweight title fight ever held in the city. It allowed Las Vegas to begin to stake its claim as the boxing capital of America. The city went all out to promote the venue. Its brand new, spick and span, $6 million domed convention centre and exhibit hall was futuristic in design by 1960 standards, with palm trees out front and 8,500 seats inside. It was a far cry from the dingy, often rat-infested halls and arenas that played host to big-time matches on the East Coast. Norman Mailer and his newest wife arrived in razzle-dazzle land at the end of a cross-country drive. Mailer was in the process of writing his first novel in years, An American Dream. His early designs called for the book to be structured around the second Patterson-Liston fight. Once in Vegas, Mailer gave Patterson proofs from a collection of his journalism called The Presidential Papers, which included his account of Patterson's first fight with Liston. Mailer regretted that he'd done so. He said, "I was glad to hear that Floyd had never read it, because I felt spooked by the Las Vegas fight, as if Floyd had read it and it had gotten him thinking of other things." Ever the good reporter, Mailer kept thorough notes about his time in what Bud Schulberg called Syndicateville, USA. Mailer ran into Cus D'Amato, now all but completely squeezed out of the Patterson team. D'Amato told him, "Everything points to an upset. The other man is casual. Patterson has been working hard. All the signs are there." Mailer scribbled this down, and perhaps believed it. No one else was holding out much hope for Floyd. Patterson was training hard at his makeshift camp outside Las Vegas at Hidden Well Ranch, a getaway catering to celebrities like Elizabeth Taylor and Eddie Fisher. Hidden Well Ranch may have been a movie star retreat, but Floyd didn't indulge himself in much luxury there. Instead, he practiced the asceticism he'd learned from D'Amato all those years ago. He rose at 4 a.m. to get his road work in, running with 2 German shepherds while tossing a red rubber ball ahead of himself. "It's nice for a change," Patterson said, "to have police dogs on your side." When Mailer paid Patterson a visit, he noticed that Floyd ate steak and liver for breakfast. "He hates it, but he does it," Mailer recorded in his notes. Patterson promised that he'd fight better than what he did in Chicago. He said, "I'm not making excuses for that other time. I'm in just as good physical condition and, as I told you, more mentally alert." Yet Floyd's psychological state was hardly picture-perfect. Howard Cosell and his wife, Emmy, visited Patterson at Hidden Well Ranch a few days before the fight. They spent an hour with Floyd, and Cosell was struck by the former champ's lack of confidence. Floyd had a hangdog air about him. It wasn't the first time Cosell noticed it. Cosell believed that the defeated expression was on its way to becoming a Patterson trademark. When 2 visitors departed, Emmy said to Cosell, that she thought Patterson seemed already beaten. "He is," Cassell said. All the while, Sonny Liston spent a good deal of his training time gambling and drinking hard at the casino tables, scowling at anyone who interrupted him. Most people kept the distance. There were exceptions, of course, and one of them was a notable exception. Past champions and top contenders typically are invited to title bouts, and a certain Cassius Clay, as one of the latter, was in Vegas. He realised that Liston would be the man he would have to defeat someday to become champion. Clay saw Liston at the Thunderbird Hotel craps table. The champ was on a losing streak, so he was already steaming by the time Cassius Clay spoke up after Sonny threw craps and watched a pile of his chips raked away. "Look at that big ugly bear. He can't even shoot craps," Clay said. Liston turned and glared at the young fighter, then picked up the dice and proceeded to roll another craps. "Look at that big ugly bear. He can't do nothing right." Liston slammed down the dice, walked over to Clay, stuck his face in Clay's face and said, "Listen, you nigger faggot, if you don't get out of here in 10 seconds, I'm going to pull that big tongue out of your mouth and stick it up your ass." Cassius Clay was apparently truly frightened. Such was Liston's psychological state on July 22nd, 1963, as he fought Floyd for the second time. In the first round, Liston smashed a seemingly defenceless Patterson with a right uppercut, followed by a left hook. Then he put Floyd down with a right cross. The referee sent Liston to a neutral corner and asked a dazed Patterson if he wanted to continue. Patterson nodded. The fight resumed, with Patterson trying to clinch Liston. The champ used his free right hand to pound Floyd's kidneys. After the ref broke them apart, Liston had his way with Floyd. Liston staggered Patterson with an enormous roundhouse left. Somehow, a wobbly Patterson remained on his feet. Liston then unloaded shot after shot. Then he floored Floyd with a massive right to the temple. During the mandatory 8 count, the referee asked Patterson again if he wanted to continue. Floyd again said yes. Liston then hit Floyd with a paralysing left to the body, then slammed him with a right followed by a crisp left hook to the head. Again, Floyd fell. As the referee signalled a knockout, Floyd pushed himself to his feet and went into a boxing stance. That he was beaten registered with Floyd only when Liston embraced him. He was all over in 2 minutes and 9 seconds, just 3 seconds longer than the Chicago fight had taken. Patterson again left boxing experts scratching their heads. "He made no use of those skills he had," commented columnist Melvin Durslag of the Philadelphia Inquirer, "and he gave a performance that was scandalously unsatisfactory." Even more critical was the matchmaker Teddy Brenner, who was a true believer in Floyd back in the early days. In Patterson's dressing room that night, Brenner unloaded. "Any man on that card tonight, from welterweight up, could have taken Patterson. The man just doesn't know how to fight anymore." This time, there would be no clandestine escape for Patterson after his failure in the ring. Floyd dutifully arrived at the press conference at 11 the next morning. He appeared to be still addled from the previous evening's beatings as he uttered sentences that confounded the assembled reporters. There was a general agreement in the room that Floyd should not postpone retirement. Later in the day, Patterson left Vegas on a private plane. The plane overheated not long into the flight and had to return to the airport. Floyd booked passage on a commercial flight. The airport was crowded with departing fight fans. Try as he may, Floyd could not hide from their prying eyes. That fall, Ebony published its list of America's 100 most influential Negroes, and Floyd was among the names. He no doubt appreciated the honour, but the words written about him had a little bit of a contradictory air. He said, "Unlike many fellow celebrities who have lent their support for the betterment of the race as checkbook citizens from behind the scenes, Floyd not only gave freely of his money, but also of his efforts and time." The editors lauded him for his trips to the South on behalf of the civil rights movement. They especially gave him credit for demanding that the seating in Miami Beach for the Third Johansson fight not be segregated, and for having African Americans seated at ringside, where I can see them, he said. But the magazine also judged Patterson to be finished as a fighter of prominence. Over the span of just a few months, Floyd had gone from being a symbol of the successful Negro in America to a relic of a bygone time. As Patterson prepared to fight Liston in 1963, America seemed to be coming apart at the seams. There was the violence in Birmingham, followed by the June assassination of the NAACP Field Secretary, Medgar Evers, in Jackson, Mississippi. The idealism of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech delivered at the March on Washington a month after Floyd lost in Las Vegas was shattered in September when 4 young black girls died in a hideous church bombing in Birmingham. Then, on a sunny Friday in November, an assassin's bullet blew the side of President Kennedy's head off in Dallas, a city rife with recreationary hate-mongering. With the racial strife, the nation's growing military presence in Vietnam, and the continuing Cold War, America appeared headed toward some sort of Armageddon. A respectable, well-spoken hero like Floyd Patterson suddenly seemed out of place. This was a time for angry people. In the months to come, Floyd would find new purpose in the boxing ring as he took it upon himself to silence the shrillest voice coming from this America in turmoil. "Say, aren't you Floyd Patterson?" asked the driver of the car that pulled over. Floyd, trotting along a country road outside Highland Mills at dawn, insisted he was not the ex-heavyweight champion of the world and that he was in fact Raymond Patterson. The car moved on. A while later, another man stopped him. "Hey, Floyd Patterson!" Patterson again said no, he was the boxer's brother Raymond. The man didn't buy it and told him so. He asked for an autograph. Patterson accepted the paper and pencil that was offered and signed it. Raymond Patterson. The incident occurred while Gay Talese was shadowing Floyd, gathering material for a profile to run in Esquire. Talese found a fighter who was frustrated and bewildered by what had happened during his 2 encounters with Sonny Liston. He did not want a rematch. Who would pay a nickel for another Patterson-Liston fight? But he wished for a way for him and Liston to square off where no one would see them. A fight in which Floyd would be free of all the pressures he had felt going into their 2 meetings. In this fantasy fight, Patterson did not want to find out if he could win. He just wanted to find out if he could get past the first round. He said, "It's not a bad feeling when you're knocked out. It's a good feeling, actually. It's not painful, just a sharp grogginess. You don't see angels or stars. You're on a pleasant cloud. After Liston hit me in Nevada, I felt for about 4 or 5 seconds that everybody in the arena was actually in the ring with me, circled around me like a family. And you feel warmth toward all the people in the arena after you're knocked out. You feel lovable to all the people. And you want to reach out and kiss everybody, men and women. And after the Liston fight, somebody told me I actually blew a kiss to the crowd from the ring." But the love evaporated. Floyd realised where he was, what had happened. What ensued was a confused pain combined with anger. There was no avoiding it. Floyd could not seem to escape conflict, especially on the home front. The Patterson children were also having a difficult time with the white kids in their neighbourhood. Floyd's children were stoned, quite literally, on the way to school, according to Milton Gross's daughter, sports writer Jane Gross. In addition to the throwing rocks, the white kids called the young Pattersons nigger, chocolate drop and Sambo. Now, a new problem had arisen. "I'm not going to work today," an upset Patterson said to Talese. "I'm going to fly down to Scarsdale. Those boys are picking on Jeannie again. She's the only Negro in this school, and the older kids give her a rough time, and some of the older boys tease her and lift up her dress all the time. Yesterday she went home crying, and so today I'm going down there and plan to wait outside the school for those boys to come out and—" Talese in tow, Floyd stormed off to the airport, threatening to deal with the offenders with a left hook. Patterson had always been afraid of flying, and he was addressing that fear by taking flying lessons. Accompanied by his pilot friend Ted Hansen, Patterson flew a Cessna to the airport in Westchester, where Sandra was waiting for him. They drove to the school. There Patterson confronted the boy who had been lifting his daughter's skirt. Despite his earlier chest thumping, Floyd threw no punches. In fact, he did nothing more than tell the boy to stop it. He said, "I won't tell your mother. That might get you in trouble. But don't do it again, okay?" The boy walked away calmly. Patterson retreated to his aeroplane and flew back to his training camp. Floyd found himself dealing with conflict, even at his inner sanctum, the place he felt most secure, his training camp. For several days in a row, Custy Amato drove to Highland Mills to visit his former fighter's camp. Each time, D'Amato banged on the door, expecting Floyd to step out and greet him. His knocks went unanswered, but Cuss knew that Floyd was inside. Miffed, D'Amato would linger sometimes for as long as an hour. Still, the door remained closed. Finally, D'Amato would leave. "We had an agreement," D'Amato would say, "that I never was to believe anything he supposedly said until he told it to my face. He has never told me to my face that I am not his manager. I have no idea why he won't see me." Unable to penetrate the wall of silence from the Patterson camp, D'Amato began legal action against Patterson for money he believed he was contractually owed from the 2 Liston fights. D'Amato claimed he was flat broke, even though he was now guiding Jose Torres up the light heavyweight ranks. He maintained that his battles with the IBC had used up every dime he'd earned off Patterson, leaving him busted. He estimated he was owed at least $250,000 from the first Liston fight alone. D'Amato asked Julius November for a full accounting of the proceeds from the first Liston fight, but November refused, or at least didn't provide enough of an accounting to satisfy D'Amato. So, D'Amato hired famed attorney Edward Bennett Williams to find remedy in the legal system. But there was more than just money involved. "I am the only man in this business who has made flat and uncompromising statements about fighters I've been associated with," D'Amato said. "When Patterson won the Olympics, I said that Floyd would be Rookie of the Year in boxing and that he would become a heavyweight champion, and he was still a middleweight. My predictions were based on knowledge and analysis of Patterson and his potential. I was derided. When Patterson was knocked out by Johansson, I saw what happened and why, and I knew what had to be done. So I went into the ring and made a flat statement that Floyd Patterson would be the first heavyweight champion to win back the title. The critics said that if Dempsey couldn't do it, how could Patterson? But then look what happened. My record, damn it, it certainly is worth some respect." But none was forthcoming for the barrel-chested white-haired man who soon began fading from public sight, as did the lawsuit. Though written off by all but his staunchest American fans, Floyd Patterson started to slowly recover a measure of respect for himself as a fighter. Wisely, he chose Sweden as the location for his next 2 fights. There, never mind what had happened with Liston, he was a beloved figure, someone who could attract a crowd of adoring fans just by walking down the street. "I'm a kind of one-man Beatles," he said. He would not have to deal with a cynical press or cynical fans. His Italian opponent for the first fight was no world beater, but that hardly mattered. After 2 humiliating knockouts, Floyd wanted a win, and he notched one early in 1964. After that time, Patterson was the 9th-ranked contender in the heavyweight category. Cassius Clay had risen to number 1. If Patterson wanted to get a shot at the title anytime soon, he needed to beat someone of a higher standing than virtually an unknown Italian boxer to lift his ranking. That opportunity came along when he was scheduled to fight Eddie Machen, the 4th-ranked contender, in July of 1964. But before that fight could take place, Talise's profile of Patterson appeared in Esquire. It was a stunning example of the new journalism, the result of Talise's dogged reporting during the weeks he spent with Floyd. Talise would return to his motel room after following Patterson through the day and dump out page after page of notes and impressions that he would later use to compromise an article as tightly constructed as the best short story. The long article was a hit from the moment it showed up on the newsstands. It was destined to be anthologised for years to come, ensuring that Patterson's name lived on. But the Esquire editors used a title for it that Talise never approved of: The Loser, which consequently served to reinforce Patterson's failings over his successes. Floyd had plenty of pressure on him to become the winner in his fight with Machen. In 1958, Eddie Machen suffered an upset in a bout with Ingemar Johansson, which opened the door for Ingo to fight Floyd for the World Championship. Before that, Machen was considered one of the best contenders for the crown. Machen hailed from Redding, California. After a few amateur fights in his late teens, he served 3 years in prison for armed robbery. When he was released, he began boxing in earnest and entered the pro ranks in March of 1955. Fighting often in the Bay Area or elsewhere on the West Coast, Machen won 24 straight bouts, including 2 wins over Joey Maxim, before fighting Zora Foley at the Cow Palace in San Francisco in 1958. The 2 men battled to a 12-round draw. Then Mason fought Johansson. After that Johansson loss, Mason fought at a furious pace, recording win after win with only occasional losses. One of the defeats was to Sonny Liston in 1960, but Mason stayed in the ring for the full 12 rounds of the fight, which was kind of a moral victory. After that, Mason scored an impressive win over contender Doug Jones in December 1961 and a draw with Cleveland Big Cat Williams in July 1962. However, authorities committed Mason to the Napa State Hospital after he threatened suicide. He was diagnosed as an acute schizophrenic. At the time, he was the third-ranked heavyweight in the world. His inactivity in the ring while he was institutionalised caused his rating to fall. Finally released, he resumed fighting in early 1964. Mason smashed Duke Sabadong to the canvas in just one round to boost his world ranking to number 4 and set up his fight with Patterson in July of that year. In spite of Mason's contender status, the fight elicited mostly yawns back in the United States. Arthur Daly of the New York Times dismissed the bout between a defrocked champion and a quondam contender as a stop on the road to nowhere. He said of the Patterson and Mason matchup, "They're a pair of emotionally entangled men with enough psychosis and neurosis to have fascinated Freud. They have totally bewildered those amateur psychiatrists, the boxing experts. Neither ever realised his full potentialities as a fighter, and now the irony is that a fight between them might have straightened out the winner at least. Now, it is too late." Still, it was a contest between 2 of the 10 highest-ranked heavyweights. Floyd's friend, Pete Hamill, thought it could be the most important fight in his career. He said, "For Patterson, the money he can earn from prize fighting is no longer of prime importance. What is important is his pride. He wants to erase the image he fears he will leave behind when he retires, that as heavyweight champion, he was an elaborate fraud with no ability to take a punch. A fraud whose true measure could be found in the total of 4 minutes and 16 seconds he lasted in the 2 fights with Sonny Liston." The bout in Rasunda, Solna, Sweden, on July 5th, 1964, turned out to be dull, with Patterson and Mason spending much of the time locked in clinches. When they weren't hugging each other, Patterson managed to knock Mason down 2 times. In the end, Floyd was awarded 9 rounds, 2 were judged even, and just 1 round went to Mason. Floyd thought the Mason bout proved that he could still battle the best in the world and win. Patterson, who planned to retire if he lost to Mason, announced he wanted to fight the man formerly known as Cassius Clay. Muhammad Ali was now the heavyweight champion of the world, having pulled off one of the greatest upsets in boxing history when he dethroned Liston earlier in 1964. Liston, overconfident perhaps, as a 7-1 favourite, trained with little intensity before that fight. He certainly looked like an older, slower fighter than he had against Patterson. Liston quickly learned that the larger, faster Ali was not going to be an easy man to defeat. After 3 rounds, Liston and his cornerman conspired to end the fight by disabling Ali. When Liston came out for the 4th round, his gloves were coated with a caustic substance. No one outside Liston's corner was ever sure exactly what it was that he had smeared into Ali's eyes. Ali's vision blurred. Ali insisted to his corner between rounds that he couldn't go on and asked that his gloves be cut off. Ali's corner wizard, Angelo Dundee, was able to flush out Ali's eyes and instructed him to stay away from Liston until his vision cleared. At the midpoint of the 5th round, Ali could see clearly again and began to take charge of the fight. In the 6th round, Ali ripped Liston's face to shreds with his whip-snap jabs. Liston, like a 12-year-old bully who was running to someone willing to stand up to him, feigned a shoulder injury and refused to answer the 7-round bell. With that, Ali became the new king of the world. In the weeks after the Mason fight, Floyd Patterson became obsessed with beating Ali for reasons having more to do with Floyd's idea about patriotism and religion than with the challenge that the young Ali presented to the ring. In October 1964, Patterson began to stir up controversy when he collaborated with Milton Gross for a Sports Illustrated essay entitled "I Want to Destroy Clay." Patterson struck out at the dethroned Liston, expressing dismay that Sonny refused to keep fighting in his championship bout with Ali. "A champion doesn't quit," Patterson said. That was certainly true for Floyd. He did have fights stopped because of injuries, but they were always halted by the referee. Floyd never once failed to answer the bell on his own. In the article, Floyd slammed Ali for telling Dundee that he wanted to quit when his eyes were burning and his vision went blurry. Floyd questioned the character of the men who had claimed the title he once proudly held, and he said, "There's a tremendous responsibility on the champion that Clay and Liston obviously don't understand, to themselves, to the sport, and to the public, especially in these times of such great social changes in our country and in the way people all over the world look at us." But Ali's religious conversion irked the good Catholic Patterson even more. The Nation of Islam, an American religion that embraced teachings contrary to Orthodox Islam, stood in opposition to all that Patterson believed when it came to the issues of race. He once told Pete Hamill, "It's not a fight for friendship, it's a fight for equality. As long as I can sleep in the same hotels as you, as long as I can eat in the same restaurants as you, as long as I can read in the same libraries and swim in the same swimming pools and watch movies in the same section as you and vote with the same rights as you, then we can consider friendship." Black Muslims under the Nation of Islam leader Elijah Muhammad believed that that was all folderol. They demanded that American society be segregated because they believed the races had no business intermingling. At the base of the Nation of Islam's belief system was the tenet that black people were not equal to white people, but superior to them. Whites, in their view, were devils, the creation of a mad scientist intent on releasing evil on the world. By expressing this kind of attitude towards whites, the black Muslims had exposed a nerve that ran throughout black communities in the United States at the time. James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time is one of the most important books written about race in America and grew out of his own mediations on the Nation of Islam. It reads, "There appears to be a vast amount of confusion on this point, but I do not know many Negroes who are eager to be accepted by white people, still less to be loved by them. They, the blacks, simply don't wish to be beaten over the head by the whites every instant of our brief passage on the planet." The message of the Nation of Islam resonated with blacks who were growing increasingly frustrated and angry by the slow progress America was making in ending the virtual apartheid that existed since the end of the Reconstruction. The Freedom Summer of 1964 may have been when Lyndon Johnson signed the landmark Civil Rights Act, but it was also when sheriff's officers, in collusion with the Klan, had killed 3 civil rights workers in Neshoba County, Mississippi, and dumped their bodies beneath a rural earthen dam. These killings and other violent incidents reinforced black Muslim concepts about why the races should remain apart. Since he was born, Cassius Clay had been exposed to his father's disdain of white people. The young boxer made for a rapt acolyte when he learned about the Nation of Islam's teachings from Malcolm X and others. And he stunned and outraged much of America when he announced his conversion and name change after he became heavyweight champion in February 1964. Floyd could not abide by a black Muslim holding what he considered to be the most prestigious title in the sports. He said of Ali at the time, "He has a right to believe what he believes, but harm has been done to the Negro's cause, and the way the rest of the world regards it by the one who calls himself Muhammad Ali." Patterson also went on to say at the time, "I am a Negro, and I am proud to be one, but I am also an American. I'm not so stupid that I don't know that Negroes don't have all the rights and privileges that Americans should have. I know that someday we will get them. God made us all, and whatever he made us is good. All people, white, black and yellow, are brothers and sisters. That will be acknowledged. It will just take time, but it will never come if we think the way the black Muslims think. They preach hate and separation instead of love and integration. They preach mistrust when there must be understanding. Clay is so young and has been so misled by the wrong people that he doesn't appreciate how far we have come and how much harm he has done by joining the black Muslims. He might as well have just joined the Ku Klux Klan." Floyd said that he hoped Ali would defeat Liston in their rematch. Then if Patterson was successful in his upcoming fights, he wanted to battle Ali to, at least in his mind, reclaim the title for America. Ali responded by calling Floyd an Uncle Tom and criticised him for moving into an affluent, predominantly white neighbourhood. Ali also questioned just how much Floyd cared about black people, saying that the only time Patterson was ever seen in Harlem was to ride in a parade. He said, "The big shot didn't have no time for his own kind. He was so busy integrating, and now he wants to fight me because I stuck up for black people." Before he could attempt to return the title to America, the 30-year-old Patterson had to best a tough Canadian. George Chuvalo was nearly 3 years younger than Patterson, and he grew up in a rough part of Toronto known as the Junction. He had begun boxing when he was 18, and he was a big man, 6 feet tall, typically weighing around 210 pounds for his fights. He hit hard, but the thing he was best known for was his chin. If Patterson had a chin made of china, as the critics often alleged, Chuvalo's chin was cast iron. He had gone the distance with the very best boxers of his time, never once getting knocked down. But he was more than a pair of fists. Though he quit school before graduating, Chuvalo read Freud and Jung, as well as Greek and Asian philosophers. He said that if he weren't a boxer, he'd have become a lawyer. By the beginning of 1965, Chuvalo had risen to be the third-ranked heavyweight contender. Patterson was rated number 2, following his victory over Mason. The winner of the Patterson-Chuvalo bout would be in line to fight for the heavyweight crown. "Should I be victorious against Chuvalo," Patterson said, "I look forward to meeting Cassius Clay. It will be a great opportunity to vindicate myself. Of course, once I do that, I want to fight Liston again. I must do that. I have a lot of things to prove to myself and to everybody." Floyd trained with particular intensity. He also put on weight, knowing that he would have to be ready to brawl with Chuvalo if necessary. As Floyd's training camp was winding down, he had muscled up to 197.25 pounds, which was the most he'd ever weighed as a boxer. Oddsmakers took heed of Floyd's impressive size and the determination he'd shown at training camp. Patterson was a 7-5 favourite, but one very noticeable voice was proclaiming that Chuvalo would win: Muhammad Ali. The fight stirred much interest in New York. Madison Square Garden sold out, which was the first time it had done so for a boxing contest in more than 2 years, suggesting to some that the involvement of a white combatant who stood a chance to win was boosting sales. But no doubt Ali played a role as well. Ali, of course, was a genius at creating publicity, and he actively involved himself in the promotion of Patterson-Chuvalo. One day he showed up at Patterson's Marylebone, New York training camp. Ali carried 2 heads of lettuce and half a dozen carrots. "Hey," he shouted to the reporters and others in the makeshift gym, "anybody seen the rabbit?" Ali's nickname for Patterson derived from his belief that Floyd was timid and scared. Ali also gave Chuvalo a nickname, the Washerwoman. The moniker came from an earlier fight in which Ali thought Chuvalo was working on an opponent pinned against the ropes. Looked like a woman washing laundry with a scrub board. Patterson came downstairs into the gym. Ali, flanked by 2 black Muslims, immediately approached Floyd with the lettuce and carrots. Patterson extended his hand to the brash young champ, who knocked it away as members of the press looked on. Ali declared to Floyd that if he could defeat the washerwoman, he might cease to be a nobody in the young champion's eyes and get a chance to reclaim the heavyweight title. The performance continued for a while, and then Patterson began to address some of the reporters present. "Despite the lettuce and the carrots, I am glad that the heavyweight champ, Mr. Cassius Clay." Ali jumped in. "That's not my name. You call me by my right name, Muhammad Ali." Some banter followed, ending with Ali saying, "Cassius Clay is a slave name. I'm free. You got a slave name. You ain't nothing but an Uncle Tom Negro. You Uncle Tom. I'll jump right in there on you now." "Well, do it," Patterson replied. Ali, employing soon-to-be all-too-familiar antics, made an exaggerated attempt to free himself from his black Muslim handlers and climb into the ring. But of course no fisticuffs were exchanged. Patterson sparred for a couple of rounds, to the accompaniment of disparaging remarks from Ali about his abilities. Then Patterson left the circus, and Ali climbed into the vacant ring to dance and shadow box for the benefit of the reporters present. No doubt, of course, this was all a distraction for Patterson, who still had to defeat a very tough George Chuvalo before he'd get his chance to fight Ali. But at the same time, he understood Ali's underlying purpose for the performance, which was, of course, to build up publicity for the Patterson-Chuvalo bout. About these kinds of encounters with Ali, Patterson would say, "I guess it all helped sell tickets to the fight. But in that split second that Cassius Clay's eyes met with mine, I could sense that he was a little embarrassed about it all. He seemed to be apologising, saying, "This is what I have to do." Later still, Ali was at a press conference with Patterson, screaming and bragging, as was his case. But then he leaned over to Patterson and whispered, "You want to make some money, don't you, Floyd? You want to make lots of money, don't you?" Well, of course, Patterson did, and he understood what his role was, there alongside Ali. This is only one of the peculiarities of the fight promotion in the era of Muhammad Ali, said the New York Herald Tribune's boxing sage, Jesse Abrahamson, who, on one hand, claims all the credit for building the gate and stirring interest in boxing, and then airily asserts, "I'm going to be the last of the champions. There will be no boxing after me." One thing was clear, as Cassius Clay growing up in Louisville, Ali had idolised Patterson. But that was all long in the past. Ever since he became a professional boxer, Ali idolised only himself. Ali did not limit his promotional efforts to Patterson alone for the Patterson-Chuvalo fight. He made a similar stop at the washerwoman's camp. Only this time, he brought buckets and mops instead of carrots and lettuce, and was joined by a return of reporters who'd ridden on Ali's beloved red and white tour bus. They almost didn't make it. Ali, notorious for his lack of skill behind the wheel, had been driving the bus when it ran off the road and into a ditch. He and the reporters were forced to walk from the scene of the accident to Chuvalo's camp outside Monticello, New York. Chuvalo played along, asking, "When do I get my bucket?" After Ali gave it to him, Chuvalo said, "Thanks, Popeye." Having crashed their training camps, Ali wasn't through with Patterson-Chuvalo. He signed on to provide the between-rounds commentary for the closed-circuit broadcast on February the 1st, 1965. At ringside before the opening round, Ali said he'd visited both camps, and to him both boys are in tip-top condition. He pronounced Patterson's punches as looking sharp, adding that Floyd was determined to win back the championship. For Chuvalo, Ali saw the contest as a do-or-die affair. "This should be a great fight, he said. He picked Chuvalo to win, in his words, because Floyd has a rather glass jaw. He added that the boxer who won at Madison Square Garden that night deserved a shot at his crown. Now, in the first round, Chuvalo seemed to have little defence against Patterson, especially his left jabs. Chuvalo tried to tie up the faster Floyd and slip in some punches. Patterson then opened up Chuvalo's nose before the 2-minute mark. Although Floyd didn't seem overly dominating, it was clearly Patterson's round, and it impressed observers at ringside. An excited Ali shouted between rounds, "Floyd Patterson surprised me, and I believe I have to change my mind. I'm a man who tells the truth, and I believe that this man won. He won the first round. He surprised me. I believe that George is fighting a little rough, a little dirty as far as boxing is concerned, hitting behind the head, holding, hitting on the clinches, and he's not doing like I thought he would. But Floyd is determined, and I believe he is a threat to my title." Patterson's resolve was impressive. Floyd was the most intense he'd been in the ring since the second Johansson fight. But Chuvalo was his match in that department. Chuvalo's team had devised a good plan. Attack Patterson's body repeatedly in the early rounds, and when he started lowering his elbows to protect his belly, attack the exposed head. Chuvalo pursued Patterson relentlessly, forcing Floyd to backpedal, and that disallowed him from throwing left hooks effectively. He slammed Floyd in the belly with the impact of a man tampering dirt with a 4x4, said Sports Illustrated Tex Mall. Chuvalo also landed some of his jackhammer shots to Patterson's vulnerable chin, but this time Patterson kept his feet. He said, "I think I proved after 13 years tonight that I can take a much better punch than you gentlemen have given me credit for." He would go on to say to reporters afterwards, "He hit me well at times, in the belly and on the chin. Several times these punches hurt me, but never seriously. I thought at one time in the fight I was behind, and my corner told me so. I guess somewhere around the 8th or 9th round they told me, I guess it was just before the 10th round, that if I would start punching and become more aggressive, I could win." Patterson was indeed particularly aggressive in those later rounds, and finished with a flourish in the 12th and final round to bring the Madison Square Garden crowd to its feet. Floyd wept in his corner as the closely scored but unanimous decision in his favour was announced, in part because of the appreciative applause from his hometown fans in the Garden, but also because he felt he had redeemed himself, at least to a degree. He told Chuvalo afterwards, "You gained more prestige in defeat than I did in victory." In fact, both combatants gained prestige. The Ring magazine named the hard-fought bout its Fight of the Year for 1965. the never-say-die Patterson, who seemed washed up after the second Liston fight, moved to the top of the list of heavyweight contenders. Now he set his aim on Ali. Shortly after the Chuvalo fight, D'Amato re-emerged in the boxing headlines. Jose Torres, Patterson's longtime friend and gym mate, defeated Willie Pastrano to become the world light heavyweight champion, with D'Amato guiding the way. Sort of. D'Amato functioned as a manager without portfolio at the time of the fight because he still had not regained a New York licence. Although the matchmakers in charge of the title fight had told Torres that they would not let him participate if D'Amato were involved. Bad blood from the old IBC days, of course. Moreover, Torres was encountering the same sort of frustrations with D'Amato that Floyd had done, and was in the process of pushing Cus D'Amato aside. But to the boxing press, Cus was regarded as the new champion's overseer, and after Torres won, Cus was newsworthy again. Cus used the opportunity to defend himself for his handling of Patterson, and to state his belief that he had been treated unfairly by Floyd and the people now surrounding him. He even took a swipe at Floyd's victory over Chuvalo. Yes, he said, Patterson had been successful in the ring, but he'd been technically unsound. Floyd had deteriorated as a boxer because Cus had not been allowed to pressure him in training to keep his skills sharp. Floyd made no public comment on Cus's statements. The spotlight on Cus following the Torres victory amounted to one of the last times D'Amato basked in the glow of the New York media. Over the next 18 months, Torres would successfully defend his title 3 times, but by the end of that time, he and D'Amato had gone their separate ways. Before Patterson could challenge the champion, Ali had to give Sonny Liston a rematch. This had been delayed for 6 months after Ali developed a hernia. Liston said that Ali's hernia was the result of all the champs hollering. During that 6 months, Malcolm X, who had proselytized Ali to the Nation of Islam, was assassinated by individuals loyal to Elijah Muhammad after a particularly acrimonious split between the black Muslims and Malcolm X. As the most famous member of the Nation of Islam, Ali conceivably was a likely target for Malcolm X loyalists seeking revenge. With violence outside the ring a real possibility, the fight was rejected by city after city until tiny Lewiston, Maine agreed to host it. The glittery throng that normally flocked to see the heavyweight championship bout stayed away, fearing the possibility of gunfire in the arena. On May 25, 1965, just 2,434 fans showed up at St. Dominic's Hall in Lewiston, the all-time record low attendance for a heavyweight championship fight. One of the people who braved whatever might happen in Lewiston was Floyd Patterson. At 1 minute 42 seconds of the first round, Muhammad Ali clipped Liston's chin with a fast straight right. To many spectators, it seemed like nothing more than a glancing blow, but it was enough to knock Liston down. Was it enough to knock him out? That question has been the subject of intense debate for nearly half a century. Liston's wallowing on the mat seemed exaggerated. While Liston was on his back, Ali preened over him, refusing to go to a neutral corner as referee Jersey Joe Walcott struggled to get him to do so, losing track of the count in the meantime. After Ali had retreated, Liston stood up and appeared set to resume fighting. Walcott readied the fighters to continue, but an official had ticked off 12 seconds while Liston was down. Fight writer Nat Fleischer shouted disinformation to Walcott. Walcott stopped the fight and raised Ali's arms as the victor. The few spectators in the arena became irate, shouting, "Fake! This is fake!" It certainly had the look of being a fixed fight. Floyd was not focused on the question of whether the fight was legitimate or not. He knew what Liston had to be feeling. This knockout was much more humiliating than either of the ones Floyd had experienced at Liston's hands. Patterson, with that in mind, decided to seek Liston out. He said, "I went into the back, in the dressing room, and he was all by himself. I said to him, 'I know how you feel. I've experienced this myself.' And he didn't say one word. He didn't say anything. He just kept looking and looking, and he had that mean look on his face. I don't think he knew he had the mean look. But I kept on talking anyway. And finally I said to myself, I don't think I'm reaching out to him. So I said, okay, I'll see you later. So I went to walk out the door, and before I could get out the door, he ran up, put his arms on my shoulder, and I turned around and he said, 'Thanks.' Then I knew I reached him." Thereafter, the one-time rivals were friendly for the few years remaining in Liston's life. Once Ali had finished with the fighter he dismissed as the Big Ugly Bear, the road was clear for a match-up with Floyd. The fight was set for the same convention centre in Las Vegas where Patterson had lost to Liston for the second time. The date was to be November 22nd, 1965, exactly 2 years after President Kennedy's murder in Dallas. America seemed a very different place from what it had been before that tragic Friday. Hope had given way to chaos. The heavyweight title fight in the fall of 1965 came to mirror the Watts riots in some ways. Ali became the face of the black anger that had erupted in Los Angeles. Floyd, who just a few years earlier had stood as the groundbreaking liberal who demanded and received fair treatment as a black athlete, became the representative of the establishment. At the time, Ali was an unpopular champion among fight fans, who thought him to be a loudmouth and eschewed time-tested fundamentals, a brash young man who deserved a comeuppance. They turned to Floyd to deliver it. None more so than Frank Sinatra, the best-known fight fan in the world. Sinatra had grown closer to Floyd since the two had met a few years earlier, and he urged him to bring respectability back to the heavyweight crown by defeating Ali. Ali, of course, had a response to the Sinatras of the world, and he said, "I am America. I'm the only part you won't recognise. But get used to me. Black, confident, cocky. My name, not yours. My religion, not yours. My goals, my own. Get used to me. I can make it without your approval. I won't let you beat me, and I won't let your Negro, in this case Patterson, beat me either." Floyd now appeared to be a cultural leftover, a man still listening to Billy Eckstine and Patti Page at a time when Soul Brother #1 James Brown topped the R&B charts. Many radicalised young African-Americans felt free at this time to load negative symbolism on Patterson. Poet, playwright and essayist Leroy Jones, soon to drop his slave name to become Amari Bakara, found Patterson to be a disgusting presence and said Patterson was to represent the fruit of the missionary ethic he had found God, reversed his underprivileged, uncontrolled, violent life and turned it to work for the democratic liberal imperial estate. The tardy black Horatio Alger offering the glad hand of integration to welcome 22 million into the lunatic asylum of white America. Baraka loved to see Patterson get knocked out and down in a fight. He said, and each time Patterson fell, a vision came to me of the whole colonial West crumbling in some sinister silence. Even from the grave, Malcolm X weighed in on Floyd. Malcolm X's autobiography was compiled from a series of interviews Alex Haley conducted over the 2 years prior to his assassination. It hit the bookstores just weeks before Patterson's fight with Ali. It included Malcolm's take on the contest, which he believed would be a battle over the truth. He said, "Nothing in all the furore which followed was more ridiculous than Floyd Patterson announcing that, as a Catholic, he wanted to fight Cassius Clay to save the heavyweight crown from being held by a black Muslim. It was such a sad case of a brainwashed black Christian ready to do battle for the white man who wants no part of him." In prison in California, black radical Eldridge Cleaver noted that many black Americans supported Ali because Patterson, in their words, was an anarchism light, years behind. Ali, who was more in harmony with the furious psychic stance of the Negro today, and Cleaver also said, the white hope for a Patterson victory was, in essence, a counter-revolutionary desire to force the Negro, now in rebellion and personified in the boxing world by Ali, back into his place. The black hope, on the contrary, was to see Lazarus crushed, to see Uncle Tom defeated. Ali himself began to refer to Patterson as the black white hope as the fight approached. Like Cleaver, Ali viewed pro-civil rights activists like Patterson as Lazaruses, dead men who had not been brought to life through the teachings of Elijah Muhammad. Such was the surface rhetoric, but both Patterson and Ali also understood how they could use their dispute over religion and the civil rights movement to ensure their bout would be a box office success, starting with the issue of Ali's name. Floyd's insistence on referring to Ali as Cassius Clay unquestionably was a suitable device for adding tension to the morality play about to take place in Las Vegas. But during a private moment around this time, Patterson said to Ali, "It's all right if I call you Cassius, isn't it?" Ali smiled and said, "Any time, Floyd." Floyd Patterson once told W.C. Hines that he continued to call the new champ Cassius Clay because he found it difficult to pronounce Muhammad. It sounded suspicious. Floyd wasn't known for having trouble pronouncing other words, but perhaps it was true. And perhaps Ali knew that and permitted Patterson to call him Cassius in private moments for that reason. But all that was indeed in private. In public, Ali roiled when Floyd referred to him by his old slave name, because it played into the idea that Floyd wasn't anything but an Uncle Tom, subservient to his white Christian masters. Ali promised to punish Floyd in the ring and give him a good beating. The approaching Ali-Patterson fight generated hostility amongst fans unlike anything since the black champion Jack Johnson battled the Great White Hope Jim Jeffries on July 4th, 1910. That fight led to race riots after the black champion Johnson handily defeated the past champion Jeffries, who'd come out of retirement to attempt to win back the title for the white race. As his bout with Ali approached, Floyd feared that he might be shot by an irate black Muslim in the audience. If not that, who knew what the contest outcome would ignite once the final bell sounded in Las Vegas? 272 miles across the desert from the burned-out hulks in Watts. But one thing was certain. The pre-fight brouhaha was translating into ticket sales, especially in the closed-circuit TV market. In the month before the fight, Dan Florio developed abdominal pain and sought out medical care. He underwent intestinal surgery in New York. A week later, to the shock of the boxing world, the 69-year-old Florio died from complications from the surgery. Suddenly, Floyd was without his trusted mentor, the man who had been with him since the very beginning of his professional boxing career, the architect of his comeback victory over Johansson. In recent fights, Patterson had even listed Florio as his manager of record. Floyd announced that he would not allow Florio's passing to delay the Ali fight, but he had to find a new trainer to work his corner, and he had to do so fast. Patterson received a call from his biggest supporter, the chairman of the board, who'd recommended a friend of his, Al Silvani. At the time, Silvani was working for Sinatra's production company, but he possessed plenty of boxing credentials. He learned the business at Stillman's gym under legends Whitey Bimstein and Ray Arcel. For the latter, he was said to have been his right-hand man and left-hand man too. Silvani had trained champions Rocky Graziano, Henry Armstrong and Jake LaMotta, among others. In the mid-1940s, Silvani met Sinatra, who asked the trainer to teach him how to box. Silvani took Sinatra to Stillman's, where the young crooner began to learn the fundamentals of sticking and moving. A second career of training famous entertainers how to box began for Silvani. He prepped Paul Newman for his role as Graziano in Somebody Up There Likes Me, and worked as an assistant director on the Elvis Presley boxing-themed film Kid Galahad. Still, Silvani was unknown to Patterson, and Floyd hesitated before agreeing that Al was the man. Silvani shortly discovered that he had more to deal with than what was expected. From time to time, Floyd experienced pain from a slipped disc. It always seemed to go away, or at least become tolerable. But as Floyd trained for the Ali fight, he suffered a major flare-up. At times, the herniated vertebra made it all but impossible for Floyd to walk. It was apparent to everyone in his training camp that he was in bad shape, but Floyd refused to speak of his condition publicly. For him, the fight had to go on, regardless of the pain he suffered. It fell to Al Silvani to try and get Floyd into good enough shape to fight Ali, through stretches and massage and manually popping the herniated disc back into place. When the two fighters entered the ring in November, Ali, at 23, was 7 years Patterson's junior and in his athletic prime. He was the one heavyweight of the time who could match Patterson's hand speed. Beyond that, Ali was faster than Patterson when it came to moving around the ring. He stood 3 inches taller than Patterson, possessed longer reach, and, at 210 pounds, weighed around 15 pounds more. Like the former light heavyweight champ Tommy Loughran, Ali fought from the outside, circling his opponents, attacking them with slicing jabs. Only Ali was much better than Loughran. It was a style guaranteed to cause many problems for Floyd, who was used to battling much more ponderous heavyweights. As the bout began in Las Vegas, Floyd seemed to match up well with Ali, catching jab after jab with the resulting distinctive snap of lever on lever. Patterson also proved deft at slipping Ali's punches, and he seemed aggressive, as if sensing he needed a quick knockout if he were to win. Meanwhile, Ali seemed more interested in talking than hitting. His mouth never stopped flapping, taunting Floyd with, "What's my name?" and "Come on, white America." He repeatedly called Patterson Uncle Tom and white man's nigger when they were in clinches. After the first 2 rounds, Patterson's back began to start spasming. Between rounds, Silvani and Buster Watson began playing amateur chiropractors. "So, I just snapped his back into place," Silvani said. He couldn't sit down, but the tricky disc refused to stay put. To Silvani and others at ringside, it quickly became clear that Patterson had no business being in the ring. His back injury prevented him from punching effectively, and he appeared to be at times all but defenceless. Yet Floyd remained on his feet, puzzling those who had seen him fall so easily at the hands of Roy Harris, Ingemar Johansson, Sonny Liston, and even Pete Rademacher. Ali later claimed that through the first 6 rounds, he threw everything in the book, but Floyd just wouldn't fall. After the 6th round, Patterson was scarcely able to move. Ali believed the referee would call a stop to the contest, but he continued. Ali decided that the immobilised Patterson was at risk for serious injury, so he contained whatever aggressive impulses he felt and backed off for the rest of the fight. Following the contest, Muhammad Ali spoke to Howard Cosell during a largely overlooked post-fight interview, and he said, "When a man is whipped and in the physical shape he is now, it's just not worth the money to harm him. I don't want to hurt nobody. Patterson's a nice fellow, a clean-living fellow." After the 11th round, Patterson's back was so tight he had to hobble to get to his corner. Some perceptive sports writers at ringside picked up on the problem, but most thought Ali was slowly and methodically beating Floyd into submission. In the 12th round, Patterson was tottering, but as Ali said, he was still ducking many of my jabs. I have to say, he took a lot from me. He was really determined. At long last, the referee stopped the bout and awarded Ali a TKO. But Floyd shook his head. "No, I was really protesting his stopping those punches. I wanted to be hit by a really good one. I wanted to go out with a great punch, to go down that way." But it wasn't to be. Patterson left the ring unmarked and surprised. He couldn't understand why Ali had not knocked him out. In his years as a prize fighter, Floyd said he'd never felt such soft punches. The fight began to take on stuff of legend the next day, when Robert Lipsight's account of it ran on the front page of the New York Times. Lipsight likened Ali to a little boy pulling off the wings of a butterfly piecemeal. Lipsight wrote that Ali mocked and humiliated and punished Floyd. The next week, Life called the match a sickening spectacle in a headline and said that Ali had delivered on a promise to degrade the former champion and make him suffer. After that, the bout became a keystone in the mythology of the greatest. It was the fight in which Ali cruelly tortured Patterson for round after round for Floyd's sin of refusing to call him Muhammad Ali. Few accounts since have mentioned Floyd's slipped disc. Patterson appeared at the press conference the next day and saw Gay Talese among the reporters. At the time, Talese was working on the celebrated article that would be published in Esquire as Frank Sinatra Has a Code, which is often referred to as one of the best magazine articles ever written by an American writer. Patterson asked Talese if he'd ever been able to get an interview with Sinatra. Talese was surprised that Floyd would have that on his mind, given all Patterson had just gone through the previous night. Talese said he'd not been able to interview Sinatra. Patterson said he planned to see Sinatra later and that he'd put in a good word for him. But Patterson never had a chance. As soon as Sinatra admitted Floyd to his suite, Floyd could tell that the chairman of the board was no longer his biggest fan. Patterson apologised for letting Sinatra down, but Sinatra didn't want to hear it. He silently turned his back on Floyd and walked to the other side of the large room, too far away for Patterson to talk to him. Patterson understood the message. After a few awkward moments, Floyd left the suite. Although Sinatra gave Floyd the cold shoulder, the man who had publicly called him an Uncle Tom and the white man's nigger began to treat him cordially. When Patterson met up with Ali in New York to pose for photos for Esquire a few months after the fight, it was as if there was 2 old friends had come together again. Patterson said he gave me a big bear hug. When I walked to the door, he had a big smile on his face, and there was real warmth there. They discussed the possibility of an exhibition tour with Ali, Patterson and Liston to make some extra money. Ali said he needed the money because he had his alimony and other debts to settle. To Patterson, he seemed like a lovable teenager he'd known in Rome during the 1960 Olympics, not the man who delivered the ugly verbal barrage in Las Vegas. He was very polite and gentle through the evening, Patterson remembered. This, Floyd would say, was the real Ali. The photo shoot was held to secure illustrations for a cover piece that eventually ran in the August 1966 issue of Esquire. The article was called In Defence of Cassius Clay, and it was one of the earliest major media pieces to present a somewhat sympathetic view of the post-conversion Muhammad Ali. Its author was none other than Floyd Patterson, who'd written it with the assistance of Gay Talese. Ali was extremely unpopular in the United States, receiving resounding boos every time he was introduced at an American boxing event. Patterson called on Americans to try and understand Ali and stop heckling him. Right now, Floyd said, the only people in America who are not booing him are the black Muslims, and maybe that is one reason he prefers being with them. Maybe if there were a few cheers from the other side of the fence and a little more tolerance, too, people would realise that Cassius Clay is not as bad as he seems. Floyd had not changed his mind about the black Muslims in general, though, but he believed Ali should be allowed the freedom to speak as he pleased. However, much it might have stung inside, Patterson was conceding that Ali had, in his own way, proved to be the man who had actually won the title for America. By 1966, Floyd was 31 years old. With 14 years of prize fighting behind him, he was on the downhill side of his career. He certainly was not the fighter he'd been at the time of the second fight with Ingemar Johansson, let alone what he was against Archie Moore. It seemed like an appropriate time maybe for him to retire. He could perhaps defeat other contenders and pick up a paycheck here and there, but as for being able to best Ali, well, that was something else entirely. Still, he needed to earn a living, and boxing was what he knew. By his own description, he was a boxing man, so he kept on training and looked for the next fight. Sandra Patterson, however, had had enough. She had been raising their 4 children in the relative affluence of first Yonkers, living in a big house surrounded by manicured lawns and white neighbours who had never accepted them, an environment Floyd didn't particularly like, and then the Great Neck. Floyd stayed at the training camps for weeks on end, and Sandra was on her own. She was an attractive woman who drew the attention of other men. A grocer made a pass at her. A dishwasher repairman called a baby when he worked at their house. Floyd warned Sandra about white men who just wanted a good time. They'd never commit to a relationship with an African-American woman. Floyd shared his concerns with Gay Talese, and he said, "I think Sandra really resented Patterson," Talese said, "and you could well be on her side to a degree because I think a prize fighter is not going to be ideally suited to be a husband." It wasn't common for a Catholic couple to divorce at the time, especially when small children were involved, so Sandra officially ended the marriage in Mexico. The house in Great Neck went up for sale. Sandra and the children moved to Springfield, Massachusetts. Floyd later admitted that, although he did not regret marrying Sandra, he felt that they wedded too young, when neither of them was capable of giving serious thought to the future. As time went on, Floyd and Sandra discovered that they were different sorts of people. "My former wife, Sandra," he said, "is an outgoing type who loves crowds and parties. I'm exactly the opposite. It was a matter of an introvert being married to an extrovert. It was doomed to fail. There was never any viciousness in our marriage, or divorce, because we realised our differences and couldn't help how we felt." Though he chose not to discuss it publicly for 2 more years, Floyd got married again around this time to the woman who had been working as his secretary, Janet Sequist. The dates of the divorce and remarriage are pretty murky. Julius November maintained that Sandra's divorce from Floyd was finalised in Mexico in July 1966. Floyd told Jet magazine in 1968 that he had wed Sequist in February of 1966. Floyd indicated to other publications in 1968 that the marriage occurred in the summer of 1966. "We definitely haven't been secretly married," Floyd said. But neither did he, and Janet seem eager to let the world at large know that they'd tied the knot. Given the tenure of the times, it was a marriage that could have provoked controversy. Janet was white. Muhammad Ali and the members of the Nation of Islam would not have approved, nor would the followers of the segregationist George Wallace, nor would much of middle-class white America. Janet was born to Swedish immigrants in Rosedale, New York, and grew up in Greenwood Lake. For years, writers repeated the falsehood that she herself was from Sweden. In Janet, Floyd found a romantic partner who took a more active role in his boxing career than Sandra ever had. Patterson eventually established a training gym at the rural home they purchased outside New Paltz, New York, so he did not have to leave home to train. Most important, Janet and Floyd had similar temperaments. "She doesn't care for publicity at all," Floyd said, "and just wants to live a quiet life, so the fewer people who come up our driveway, the better we feel. She's a financial whiz and was quite well off when we met, so she watches the financial end and I take care of the boxing part." For his first post-Ali fight, Patterson signed to meet a boxer who lacked nothing when it came to moxie or his ability to spill blood, especially his own. Henry Cooper was very popular with UK fight fans as the first British boxer to seriously contend for the heavyweight title in half a century. The high point of his career came in 1963 when he came close to derailing Muhammad Ali's climb to the championship. During the closing seconds of the fourth round of their fight in 1963, Ali was showboating. His hands were down at his side and daring Cooper to hit him. Cooper, who seemed to be out on his feet from the pummeling Ali had already given him, suddenly clubbed the greatest with a left hook to drop Ali. Ali seemed unlikely to answer the count, but then the bell rang to end the round, saving Ali from being counted out. Ali's trainer, Angelo Dundee, was able to work his magic in the corner to revive his fighter. Ali was able to end the fight in the next round, but Cooper had come close to knocking Ali out. So, R. Henry, as Cooper's Cockney fans called him, was a threat to a boxer like Patterson, who had a history of allowing himself to be hit. Henry's hammer had led him to some quality wins, including victories over Zora Foley and Brian London. But Cooper had lost to Ali a second time in May 1966. To get his career back on track, he needed to score a win. Patterson told reporters that he would retire if he lost to Cooper, and seemed to mean it. Staged at Wembley Stadium in London, the September 1966 contest had respectable marquee value. Cooper remained the British champion, and he had been ranked as the number 8 contender by the ring even after his losses to Muhammad Ali. Patterson was the number 9 contender, according to the sanctioning organisation known as the World Boxing Association, which did not rank Cooper. Patterson entered the fray as a 2-1 favourite. This was rare for a fight for Patterson, in that he didn't surrender a weight advantage to his adversary. He weighed 193 pounds to Cooper's 191 3/4. Patterson's back didn't seem to bother him at all as he danced around the ring, adopting the old peekaboo style from time to time to block Cooper's hard shots. In the third round, Patterson dropped Cooper with a left hook. Patterson floored him again in the fourth round, smashing his nose. Cooper arose one more time, but Patterson knocked him flat again with a deft combination of punches. That was it for R. Henry. True to form, Floyd helped Cooper up from the mat after the referee called to an end for the bout. Floyd was apologetic about the cut he gave Cooper on the side of the nose, but he also believed he had redeemed himself after the Ali fight fiasco. Patterson hoped his performance might get him a rematch with the champ down the line. He said, "I hope I'm one step closer towards Cassius Clay." Ali agreed that Floyd was just that. "He is another step closer," the champ, who had expected Cooper to win, said. He declared that Floyd had been impressive in defeating the British battler. Floyd dropped any talk of retirement, and Ali said he would be willing to negotiate with Patterson for a rematch. But soon, events beyond Floyd's control rendered moot any talk of Ali Patterson too. At least for the time being. Even as talk made the rounds about an Ali Patterson rematch, Cus D'Amato was back in the news. Like Floyd, Cus was eyeing Ali's title. Though he remained unlicensed to manage boxers in New York, Cus had entered into an agreement to prepare a man-mountain of a fighter named Buster Mathis for a possible title shot. As he had with Jose Torres, D'Amato functioned as Mathis's de facto manager. Mathis was a somewhat promising young heavyweight. He had won the 1964 Olympic trials, but a broken hand prevented him from representing the United States in the Games. Instead, alternate Joe Frazier fought in the Olympics, winning the heavyweight gold medal. In January 1967, his broken hand a distant memory, Mathis was an experienced pro, ready to contend for a title. His career was under the control of a syndicate of young rich men, none of whom was out of his 20s. The syndicate brought in D'Amato to prepare Mathis for a title shot, and did so with a media splash. D'Amato set about getting his 300-pound Mathis ready for the big time, putting him on a diet. D'Amato told the press that he was confident that a slimmed-down Mathis would destroy top contender, smoking Joe Frazier, and then, in the fall of 1967, be ready to knock out Ali to claim the heavyweight title. But Mathis would have no more chance of fighting Ali that year than Floyd did, and Cuss's involvement with Mathis didn't last much longer. Shortly, Cuss would leave the city to live in obscurity in a small upstate town. In early 1967, the heavyweight boxing world entered a chaotic state with the ring exile of Muhammad Ali. Years earlier, Ali had been declared ineligible for military induction by his local draft board after he failed what was essentially a writing and spelling test. The board reversed itself after the Pentagon relaxed eligibility standards. Ali could be drafted in after all. In April of 1967, citing his standing as a minister in the Nation of Islam, Ali refused military induction on religious grounds. The government's response was that Ali's motivation for refusing the draft was political and not religious. Criminal proceedings were then initiated against the heavyweight champion. Ali was found guilty of draft evasion. As soon as the verdict was in, the various professional boxing sanctioning organisations lost little time in stripping Ali of his heavyweight title. His professional boxing licences were also revoked. Floyd was somewhat conflicted by what had occurred to Ali. He agreed that the government should prosecute Ali for refusing induction, and he said, "I feel that if a man lives in a country and enjoys the fruits of the country, he should be willing to fight for it. Clay should serve his country. If not, he should go to jail or be driven out of the country." Floyd said he could understand the rationale of the sanctioning bodies for lifting the title, but in spite of that, Floyd believed Clay is the heavyweight champion. There are no two ways about it. Regardless of what he is outside the ring, inside the ring he's the champion, and the titles are won and lost inside of the ring. It would be 3 years before Ali returned to boxing. In the meantime, various sanctioning organisations and promoters attempted to capitalise on the vacant throne. A new promotional group called Action Sports Inc. appeared on the scene with a proposal to conduct an elimination tournament to determine a replacement champ, at least for the WBA version of the heavyweight crown. 8 top contenders were scheduled to take part, but the tournament lost much of its lustre when the fighter who was emerging as the best of the contenders, Joe Frazier, had pulled out. Further diminishing the tournament's legitimacy was the absence of other top heavyweights, such as Sonny Liston, George Chuvalo and Zora Foley. Still, the tournament moved forward, with Leotis Martin taking Frazier's place. Floyd was included, as was an impressive young California contender, Jerry Quarry. Floyd and Quarry had agreed to fight each other before the tournament was announced, so they would meet to fulfill that contract first. Quarry was a decade younger than Patterson, with a thick neck, rigid abs and a chin that could withstand a heavy shot. Quarry was often promoted as an Irish fighter, but he was, in the words of Sports Illustrated Mark Cram, pure OK. Quarry had turned pro at his parents' urging, and it certainly beat his former job of changing tyres at a Greyhound bus garage. He was no fighter to take lightly, and Patterson knew it. He was a tough, young, legitimate heavyweight contender with an effective right hand. He no doubt received more press than he otherwise would have because he was a promising white fighter at a time when heavyweight boxing had largely become a black man's realm. But Quarry had put together a record of 23-1-3, losing only to Eddie Machen in 1966. The first Patterson-Quarry fight took place on June 9, 1967 at the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, and the 23,000 fans cheered when Quarry won the first 2 rounds of the fight. He floored Patterson twice in the second round alone, but Floyd came back to win the next 4 rounds. Then, in the 7th round, Quarry landed a stiff right to Patterson's head. Patterson seemed groggy for a few seconds, but he surprised Quarry with a left hook that set the younger fighter tumbling just before the bell. Floyd seemed to control the remainder of the fight. Quarry was bleeding, bruised and swollen when the final bell rang, but the fight was ruled a draw. The referee's calls in particular were suspicious, outraging many at ringside, including Joe Frazier. Floyd was so sure he had won, he stood in the ring with his mouth agape at the announcement of the decision. Patterson swallowed his disappointment and left on a USO tour of Vietnam. He supported the American war effort there, and he was well received during the trip. Floyd was impressed by how well blacks and whites in the military interacted with each other. "There's no race problem here," he said. "It would be a fine example for the entire country to live together like these guys do here. Everybody helps everyone else out all the time." He expressed to the troops he met that he supported their mission. Patterson may have fully backed civil rights protests earlier in the decade, but he had no use for Americans who protested against the war. He said, "I made it a point not to wait for them to ask about these peace demonstrations back home. Every place I went, I told them not to be discouraged, that it was only a minority, a handful, and that 50% of that minority don't have any understanding of what's going on." Floyd added that he went to Vietnam to see if he could do some good. "I believe in my country," he said, "and I just came over to see what I could do." When he returned, he prepared to take on Quarry again, this time as part of the heavyweight championship elimination tournament. Floyd may have disagreed with the decision to remove the title from Ali, but he was nevertheless willing to fight for the vacant championship. Once again, Patterson and Quarry would fight in Los Angeles. Quarry promised a different outcome this time, pledging he would be more aggressive in his attempt to defeat Floyd. As if to prove his point, Quarry was particularly brutal with his sparring partners leading up to the match. As it turned out, however, Quarry failed to fight much better in October than he had in June. In the early going, he had Floyd in trouble twice, but he couldn't put together the punches to knock out the former champ. Just as he had in their previous fight, Quarry wilted against Patterson during the later rounds. Yet Quarry was awarded the split decision. Again, the verdict was controversial. "Quarry stole the return fight," said Mark Cram, "thanks to the malnutrition of the officials." The sparse crowd at the Olympic Auditorium shouted boos and pelted the ring with the beer cups. With Patterson out of the elimination tournament, Quarry progressed to the finals, where he was decisioned by Jimmy Ellis, the man crowned WBA heavyweight champion. Almost a year passed between Patterson's split decision loss to Quarry and his next fight. Those months included some of the most turbulent times the United States has ever known. Disagreement about the war in Vietnam and the civil rights movement led to strife throughout the country, from college campuses to urban ghettos. The gap between black and white Americans seemed to grow with each passing day, as did the gap between World War II generation and its baby boomer offspring. Things fall apart. The centre cannot hold, William Butler Yeats had written in a apocalyptic poem nearly 50 years earlier, yet those words seem particularly appropriate for America in 1968. At no time did the centre seem less likely to hold than in April, when an assassin's bullet felled Martin Luther King Jr. in Memphis. A grieving Patterson made plans to go to Atlanta to attend the funeral for the man who symbolised the dream Floyd and other moderates held for a peaceful, integrated American society. While post-assassination violence erupted across the United States, Floyd arrived in Atlanta that was unprepared for the funeral, an Atlanta that was in a state of shock, an Atlanta whose population had swelled with the influx of as many of 250,000 mourners. The torch of love seemed nowhere to be found in America in 1968. Improbable as it seemed to many fight fans, Jimmy Ellis was the recognised heavyweight champion in most states in the United States. Ellis was a fellow Louisville fighter, roughly the same age as Muhammad Ali, and it was Ellis's fate to always be in the more famous Kentuckian shadow. While Ali's career was sublimely plotted and executed by his management, Ellis had to take what he could to get it when he could get it. He was a natural middleweight and spent 3 years fighting in that category before moving up in weight. As a light heavyweight, and then as a heavyweight, he won 10 straight fights, including victories over formidable challengers like Leotis Martin and Oscar Bonavena. But during that time, he was better known for being one of Ali's sparring partners. He even knocked Ali cold one night during one of the sparring sessions. Still, almost no one considered Ellis to be championship material, right up until April 27, 1968, when he decisioned Jerry Quarry to win the WBA World Heavyweight title. Once Ellis was champ, Teddy Brenner attempted to match him with Joe Frazier, whom the New York Athletic Commission recognised as World Heavyweight Champion. The winner would emerge with an essentially unified title, but Ellis turned down Brenner's $250,000 offer, most likely because Ellis stood little chance of beating Frazier. Ellis's handlers then contacted Patterson, who readily accepted an offer to fight Ellis in a title match. Nearing 34 years of age, considered a has-been after his loss to Ali, Patterson suddenly had a chance to be a world champion for a third time. Las Vegas and the Swedish city of Stockholm bid on hosting the fight. In the end, Stockholm won out. The package put together by none other than Edwin Ahlquist, Ingemar Johansson's old manager. The contract offered Patterson a good payday, $60,000. Ellis would receive $125,000, and Floyd's kid brother Raymond would fight on the undercard. Ray had turned pro in March of 1963, and the following year began fighting regularly in Sweden, where he became a fan favourite. Harold Conrad was promoting the fight, but there was a catch. Floyd, intrigued by Hollywood for years, had agreed to play a small role on the popular TV series The Wild Wild West. Patterson told Conrad that the fight's original date had to be postponed until he could film his scenes for the TV show. Conrad was flabbergasted. How could anyone put a bit TV part ahead of a title fight? "I'm not going to be fighting forever," Patterson said. "I'm going to become a movie star. If Jim Brown can do it, I can do it." Conrad feared that this was not going to sit well with the Swedes involved in the fight's promotion. He contacted the Wild Wild West star and producer Robert Conrad, no relation, and asked him to persuade Patterson to change his mind. The actor, a fight fan, agreed with Harold Conrad that Patterson was nuts to postpone the Stockholm fight and said he would try to talk Patterson out of it. He failed. "It's no soap," the Wild Wild West star reported to Conrad. Patterson insisted on shooting the series, so the fight was rescheduled for September 14, 1968. The date wasn't the only sticking point, however. Choosing a referee caused controversy as well. The Swedish prize-fighting rules held that the referee would be the only official scoring the fight. No judges would be involved in scoring, so both fighters' camps attempted to get a ref in place who would not be inclined to favour the other side. Harold Conrad produced a list of 5 referees. Harold Valan, who'd boxed out of Brooklyn in the 1930s before beginning a distinguished career as a ring official, topped the list. Angelo Dundee, who was acting as Ellis's trainer and manager, nixed him immediately. Dundee believed that a New York-based referee like Valan would be inclined to favour Patterson. When Conrad contacted Patterson and told him that Dundee did not want Valan, Floyd said, "Then I want Valan." Conrad went back to Dundee and said Valan was Patterson's choice. A great deal of back and forth bickering occurred before Dundee finally accepted Valan. Patterson was an 11-5 underdog, according to London oddsmakers, one of whom sniffed that betting on Patterson to win would be like betting on the Communists to win the upcoming British national elections. The weigh-in was unlike any the boxing reporters on hand had ever witnessed. It occurred at a hotel ballroom that had the air of an art gallery, as soft music played and vases of roses adorned the tables. Patterson arrived at the weigh-in at as felt 188.5 pounds. Ellis outweighed him by 10 pounds. Floyd seemed relaxed. He had a ref of his choosing making the decisions, and he knew he would have an enthusiastic Swedish crowd supporting him at the fight. The Swedes had plenty to cheer about. In the first round, Patterson landed a right-hand punch that fractured Ellis's nose, sending blood cascading down Ellis's chest. Patterson later opened a large cut above Ellis's right eye. Floyd clearly seemed to be winning, ready to make history as the first man to win the heavyweight title 3 times. Back in America, his fans watching ABC's live broadcast were starting to celebrate. But then, a curious thing occurred. Howard Cosell's audio commentary from Sweden suddenly went dead. An ABC sportscaster in New York was quickly enlisted to provide a voiceover. The sportscaster in New York reported that Patterson was winning on the scorecards kept by boxing writers at ringside. In the 14th round, Patterson hammered Ellis with 2 left hooks that knocked the champ off his feet. In the 15th and final round, the video feed failed, leaving televisions in America blank. ABC scrambled to recover the lost signal. American viewers who were at home were unaware of how the last round played out, though it appeared certain, barring a knockout, Floyd was going to win. Finally, the decision was announced, and it was a stunner. Jimmy Ellis had won, and won big. Valan scored it a lopsided 9 rounds for the sitting champion to just 6 rounds for Patterson. The decision caused a near riot among the pro-Patterson fans in the Stockholm Soccer Stadium. Police had to provide Valan with protection as he departed the venue. The fight's outcome outraged Floyd's followers in America as well. Arthur Mercante, a boxing referee who worked some of the biggest fights of the late 20th century, was watching the bout on TV and nearly choked on his beer when he heard the decision. He said, "It was clear to anyone with 20/20 vision that Floyd Patterson was the clear winner." Mercante thought Valan was lucky to get out of the stadium alive. Cassell said he saw the fear on Valan's face as the cortege of Swedish cops swept the referee past the sportscaster. Cassell interviewed Floyd, who came across as always the perfect gentleman, once he knew the camera was on. Patterson refused to admit he believed he had won the fight. But it was a different story once Patterson was out of range of the camera. Patterson is screaming in his dressing room after the fight that he was jobbed and blames it all on the referee, said Harold Conrad, who was rendered incredulous by what Patterson was saying. After all, Harold Valan had been the Patterson's camp top choice. Conrad's incredulity grew as Patterson's rank continued. He makes no bones about it and says that Valan is in the pay of the Dundees, Angelo and his brothers. He also says that Valan is hanging out with the Dundees and living at their hotel, which isn't true. Conrad scheduled a press conference to allow Patterson to air his grievances. The reporters showed up, but Patterson did not. Conrad discovered that Patterson was at the airport, literally helping Cassell with his baggage. Cassell said he personally carried our bags to the trunk of his car and drove us to the airport. He had about him a sense of elation. He admitted to me now that he indeed thought he had won the fight. I asked him why he wouldn't say so in the ring. He shrugged, that little shrug of his. When we got to the airport, Floyd carried our bags to the ticket counter. The Swedish people looked at him with love. Some would reach out and touch him, softly, gently, as he would bow his head. Back in the United States, Patterson finally asserted during interviews with Cassell on ABC and with Johnny Carson on NBC's The Tonight Show that he believed he had beaten Ellis. But there was to be no third crown for Patterson. Legend has it that Patterson carried a grudge against Harold Valan for years. Such was not the case. Charles Valan, Harold's son, said that his father and Patterson actually dealt with each other amenably in the years after the fight. Floyd Patterson was always a gentleman, he said, and understood that boxing is a judgment sport and the referee goes by what he sees in the ring. I have had the opportunity to view the fight and I'm amazed at how one-sided the crew of ABC were and how from the start they favoured Floyd. Cassell no doubt believed that Floyd had every right to be angry at Valan. The sportscaster was growing wary of what he believed was Floyd's perfect gentleman act. There is no question that this posture continually appealed to the public, Cassell said. But equally, in my mind, there had been no question it was a posture, and this was confirmed for me forevermore in 1968. It was exactly what the fans wanted to hear, and Floyd instinctively knew it. He always did know how to appeal to the public. Cassell eventually dismissed Floyd as a fighter whose career had been a fantasy. Cassell's gift for hyperbole was clear when he made that statement. Floyd's career was far from a fantasy, and Cassell had to know that. But in fact, Cassell was finished with Patterson in spite of their earlier close relationship. Floyd had become yesterday's news to Cassell, who by the time had inexorably wed his career to Muhammad Ali. Ali was brash, hip, part of the baby boomer generation. Floyd was none of these things. Patterson could no longer be of benefit to Howard Cassell. At the end of 1968, Floyd fired Julius November as his attorney. November, Patterson said, had made 4 large investments of Patterson's money, all of which had failed. Patterson said he was suing November for a full accounting of his money. With November now gone, all of Floyd's owed entourage had fallen by the wayside. Floyd plodded onward to whatever inevitability awaited him. Floyd fought 10 more times over the next 4 years, but none of the bouts were title shots. They were just paydays. Floyd might have been only a shadow of the boxer he'd once been at his peak, but as a man, he had not lost the capacity to surprise people he met along the way. In May 1971, he battled Terry Daniels. Daniels' cornerman that night was Doug Lord, a Dallas-based trainer and manager who'd guided Curtis Coates to the world welterweight title. Patterson won a unanimous decision. After the fight, Floyd found Lord and asked if he would mind staying up to talk for a while. Patterson didn't feel like sleeping just yet. Lord said he'd be glad to. He accompanied Patterson to the apartment where Floyd was staying while in Cleveland for the fight. Patterson introduced him to Janet and the couple's 2 small daughters, Jennifer and Janine. Once Janet and the girls retired, Lord and Patterson began talking and continued to do so until dawn. The conversation centred around Terry Daniels' ring possibilities. Patterson was certain that Daniels had no chance to win the championship, but he was also convinced that Daniels could make some money out of boxing if he handled his career the right way, and Floyd shared his opinions about how that could happen. After dawn, Lord left the apartment amazed. In all his years in boxing, he had never met an opposing boxer who wanted to talk the night away after a fight. In 1972, Floyd was 37, well beyond the typical retirement age for most boxers of the time. Rocky Marciano retired at 32, for instance. Yet Floyd kept on fighting. 9 months after the Daniels fight, Patterson took on Argentinian Oscar Ringo Bonavena, a heavyweight whose career was both colourful and controversial. Bonavena had emerged as one of the division's top contenders. He was the first boxer to knock down Joe Frazier. The ring editor Nat Fleischer called Bonavena the most powerful fighter he'd ever seen. Bonavena used that power to defeat contenders like George Chuvalo, Zora Foley and Karl Mildenberger. In December 1970, Bonavena gave Muhammad Ali a very tough fight for the North American Boxing Federation's heavyweight title. Ali won the bout, but it took him 15 rounds to do so. Bonavena was a born brawler, and his passion for fisticuffs was not confined to the ring. Once, Bud Shrake travelled to Argentina to profile Bonavena for Sports Illustrated. The piece was never finished because Argentinian authorities mistook Shrake for a political opponent of the regime then in power and jailed him. While he was there, though, Shrake was able to see Bonavena in action on the Buenos Aires streets. One night, Ringo, given the nickname because of his Beatles-like haircut, abruptly floored a man. When Shrake asked him why he'd done it, Bonavena explained that the man was standing where he wanted to stand. Bonavena was the clear favourite going up against Patterson, a hellion with the capacity to rough up the older boxer. The ghost of Floyd Patterson walked in Madison Square Garden last night, said Red Smith of the February 1972 fight, and the sad part of it was that the ghost won. Looking no more like a 2-time champion of the world than one would expect of a 37-year-old in his 20th year as a professional fistfighter, Patterson still had enough to win a unanimous decision in 10 rounds with rough, inept Oscar Bonavena. The 17,958 fans present were euphoric about the decision, although, as Smith mused, some must have had misgivings about the outcome because it would encourage Patterson to keep fighting. Patterson had let it be known that he wanted a fight with Joe Frazier, but such a contest was not in the works. Instead, Patterson would get one more shot at Muhammad Ali. As he was training for his September 1972 match with Ali, Patterson took a break to make another visit to the White House, this time to meet with a Republican president, Richard Nixon. Over the previous 10 years, the United States had changed greatly on the political front. Floyd had changed little. In the early 1960s, the left had embraced Kennedy's military action in Vietnam, which Floyd supported. By 1972, Liberals had turned against Vietnam, but Floyd continued to support American involvement. In the early 1960s, the left dismissed radical organisations like the Nation of Islam and the Black Panthers, but by the early 1970s, these groups had gained credibility among Liberals. Not so with Floyd, however. Many on the left accepted Muhammad Ali's jabs that Floyd was just an Uncle Tom. So largely abandoned by Liberals, Floyd had no qualms about meeting with the politician who stood as their fiercest bogeyman. Nixon, facing the re-election in November, no doubt welcomed the opportunity to meet with a high-profile African-American like Patterson. Few black voters supported the president. By the time of the meeting, just past noon on August the 8th, 1972, Nixon hardly needed to fear losing the election to George McGovern. Yet, as the Watergate episode proved, Nixon was not one to take any election for granted. So Patterson and his wife and their 2 daughters appeared at the White House for what was essentially a photo opportunity. The meeting between the president and the former heavyweight champion lasted just 7 minutes, sandwiched between other meetings on a busy White House calendar. Nixon was awkward during the session, as he usually was in situations that required small talk. He called Patterson champ and attempted to chat with the Patterson daughters. Floyd and Nixon talked a bit about Clifford Evans, a long-time reporter and Nixon friend. Then surprisingly, Nixon blurted out that he'd never seen a prize fight. "I mean, I've followed professional sports for many, many years," he said. But the president did manage to talk a bit about Archie Moore and Joe Louis. Nixon wound down their brief conversation by telling Patterson he'd been a great credit to the sport. Patterson and his family departed, and Nixon returned to matters of state. If Patterson's first visit to the Oval Office a decade earlier had been big news, this was anticlimactic, and ultimately meaningless. No one in the press cared much about it. Boxing was slipping in importance as a sport, and as the years progressed, presidents would find little to value in a professional fighter visiting the Oval Office. Floyd was one of the last to do so, until the sensational Manny Pacquiao received a White House invitation to meet with President Barack Obama in February 2011, reviving the practice of Oval Office visits by boxers. Muhammad Ali's return to boxing had been nothing short of remarkable. While his draft evasion conviction worked its way through appeals courts, efforts began to find an American location that would be willing to host an Ali fight. Finally, in 1970, the city of Atlanta granted him a license to box. A match was made with Jerry Quarry, which Ali won in 3 rounds. Shortly thereafter, the New York State Supreme Court lifted Ali's ban from boxing. Allowed to fight in New York once more, Ali eventually signed to fight Joe Frazier for the World Heavyweight Championship. Hyped as the fight of the century, the Madison Square Garden contest occurred on March 8, 1971. Though Ali dominated the first 3 rounds, Frazier took command of the fight, knocked Ali down in the final round, and won a solid unanimous decision. Ali put together 7 victories in a row following his loss to Frazier. Yet another title shot for Ali seemed remote at the time, and Floyd had been written off as a potential champion long ago. So Ali Patterson too was greeted by yawns at best from the moment he was announced. Fans expecting histrionics from Ali were disappointed. The press conference at which the contract was signed was a subdued affair, with Murray Chess of the New York Times writing that Ali acted as if he'd just finished a dual course with Amy Vanderbilt and Dale Carnegie. In fact, Ali used the occasion to show his respect for Patterson. "I thought he was finished," Ali said, "but like a ghost, he keeps coming back. It's something to see him still going like he is. He came back after Johansson, he came back after Liston, he came back after Quarry, he came back after me. Now he's in the lights of Madison Square Garden again. If Floyd Patterson whoops me, Joe Frazier will look like nothing to him. Floyd Patterson is a better boxer than Frazier. He's a scientific boxer. He'd be like a school teacher to Frazier." Even the old issue surrounding Ali's name failed to provoke him. "He still says Clay," Ali said, "but I can't even get mad at him. He's so nice. Everybody else calls me Muhammad, and he calls me Clay. He's the only one who can get away with it." Odds makers wouldn't even touch the contest. They provided no betting line on the fight, a rarity in the world of betting. In at least one influential corner, though, Ali's making a match with Patterson elicited outrage. Howard Cosell went on the air to say the fight should not be sanctioned. Not only was Patterson beyond his prime, Cosell said, but even in his prime, Patterson was no match for Ali. Cosell reiterated his long-held belief that their first fight lasted as long as it did only because Ali had carried Patterson. Madison Square Garden used Cosell's remarks as part of its PR campaign for Ali Patterson 2. Patterson intended to show the Cosells of the world. Ali predicted that the fight would go all the way, last all 12 rounds. But surely few of the 17,378 who showed up at the Garden actually bought into that, even though they did give more cheers to Patterson than they did to the greatest. The genial nature of the pre-fight activities could be explained, at least in part, by the reason the fight even took place. Much was made in the pre-fight publicity about how Patterson had earned $8 million in the ring, which was more than any other boxer in history had earned up to that point. Speculation held that he'd managed to keep up to $4 million of that, which was certainly a sizable fortune by 1972 standards. But the reality was that Patterson was anything but rich at the time, a fact that shocked Cosell when he learned about it. In a private conversation between Ali and Cosell, Ali promised he would not harm his old boyhood hero in the ring. He said he agreed to the fight only to help Floyd out. Patterson needed money, Ali told Cosell. Cosell found that hard to believe given Floyd's reputation for managing his money well. "No," Ali said, "his taxes were all mixed up and the Internal Revenue has got all of it." Surprised by this revelation, Cosell contacted Bob Arum, Ali's tax attorney at the time and later famous, of course, as the fight promoter. Arum confirmed to Cosell what Ali had said. Patterson was broke. The bout was built on Ali's desire to help Patterson, not exactly a situation that would boil the blood of either combatant. Ali outweighed Patterson by almost 30 pounds. Compared to the Ali of the 1960s, the Ali of the early 70s looked overstuffed and wooden, his footwork significantly slower than it was at his prime. Still, Floyd was no match for him. There was one key blow. a 6-round straight right that ripped open a deep cut above Patterson's left eye. Patterson somehow hung on for the rest of the round and threw the next one, although wobbly with blurry vision. The fight doctor examined Patterson and decided he should not continue. Referee Arthur McCanty awarded Ali a 7th-round knockout. Afterwards, Ali insisted to reporters that Patterson was a better fighter now than he'd been 7 years earlier when the two fought for the first time. The judges' scorecards had given some of the early rounds to Patterson. Still, Patterson looked like a used-up boxer. If he won some of the early rounds, it was due more to Ali's own lackadaisical performance than to any dominance on Patterson's part. The whole affair ended with an air more conducive to pathos than a prize fight, in the words of sports writer Dave Anderson. But the fight accomplished what its enablers set out to do in the first place. Ali took a step towards regaining his lost title, and Patterson took home a generous purse for a one-time great now on his last legs. $100,000 guaranteed against 20% of the total receipts. Afterward, Floyd had little meaningful to say about his future. He retreated to the upstate New York home he shared with Janet and went into training, as always, though he had no matches lined up. The thing about Floyd, said veteran New York sports writer Vic Ziegel, is that he never exactly retired. He just stopped fighting. For years people kept waiting to see if he would box again. Patterson did, in fact, come close to boxing once more. 5 years after battling Ali at the Garden, Ali's people approached him about the possibility of yet another rematch. Ali had regained the title in 1974, but by 1977, Ali, a bloated parody of the greatest of all time, desperately needed a fight against a challenger who was unlikely to give him a hard time in the ring. Floyd, now in his 40s, just might fit that bill. But in the end, Floyd Patterson said no. Floyd's battles in the ring were behind him. Floyd's career may have ended, but he never left boxing. Like Voltaire's Candide, he settled in to cultivate his garden. Floyd's garden was New Paltz, less than 15 miles from Wiltwyck in the Hudson Valley region that Patterson considered a kind of paradise. He opened the gym on his property to other fighters and began training boxing prospects from the area. All sorts of people worked out at his gym, but Floyd focused his efforts on teenagers, especially those who were poor or troubled. In his own way, carrying on the legacy of Wiltwyck. He attempted to instill in the kids the old-fashioned virtues he valued. He did not drink or take drugs. He was committed to fitness, as he had been throughout his boxing career. He ran with a passion, becoming a marathoner. The boxers he trained also logged many miles. In the gym, he sparred with the kids himself, often more than 20 rounds a day. Floyd didn't even bother to wrap his hands. He just slipped on some old gloves and climbed into the ring. In 1979, Floyd's belief that boxing could redeem a kid with troubles led him and Janet to adopt one of the boys who showed up at the gym, Tracy Harris. Tracy was 14 at the time and had been training at Floyd's gym since he was 11. Floyd was 44 at the time, perhaps a little old to be adopting a boy Tracy's age, but Patterson imparted all the fighting knowledge he could to his adopted son, and Tracy thrived in the ring with Floyd as his manager. Fighting as Tracy Harris Patterson, he won 2 New York Golden Gloves titles before turning pro in 1985. In 1992, Tracy became a world champion, winning the International Boxing Federation's Super Featherweight title. It was a first in the world of boxing, a world champion father who trained and managed a world champion son. But the relationship between Floyd and Tracy deteriorated as Tracy questioned his father's management decisions. Finally, Tracy split with Floyd, only to reconcile shortly before Floyd's death. About the time Floyd and Janet adopted Tracy, Floyd was making amends with the man who had been something of a surrogate father to him 30 years earlier. After he left the city, Custy Amato had settled in Catskill, New York, not far from Floyd's home in New Paltz. The two men began to see each other at amateur boxing events, and over time they started to warm to each other again. In 1985, Custy's health declined, and Patterson went to visit his old manager as D'Amato lay dying of pneumonia in a New York City hospital. During a bedside confession, Floyd finally told D'Amato that it had been Jim Jacobs' television deal that caused him to make the final break with Cuss. Floyd said he believed at the time that Cuss had betrayed him. D'Amato looked relieved once he heard the explanation. "It's all right, Floyd," the old man said. A week later, Cuss D'Amato passed away. Floyd thereafter said that firing Cuss was the biggest mistake he'd made. Floyd had no compelling reason to rekindle any sort of relationship with Ingemar Johansson. Ingo had said many negative things about Patterson during the time of their rivalry, but the 1980s found Johansson on hard times. He had fallen out of the limelight, had been through a divorce and allowed his money to slip away. Ingo lived in a rundown Florida motel he operated with his son, far from the life of lobster and champagne he'd known as heavyweight champ. No longer a pretty boy, Johansson weighed more than 300 pounds. Floyd reconnected with Ingo, and the two men developed into fast friends. Patterson encouraged Johansson to take up running to get back in shape, and Floyd and Ingo made the news when they ran in a marathon together. Even after Johansson returned to Sweden, he and Floyd made transatlantic flights to visit each other. Perhaps it was Patterson's Catholic faith that compelled him to reach out to those who had offended him the most. Without question, he was devout. He became a Eucharistic minister, giving communion to new Palt shut-ins. He was a mainstay in the town's Knights of Columbus activities as well. As a Christian, Floyd found it important to present himself as a decent person. At times during his boxing career, an air of penitence seemed to hang around him. Howard Cosell, for one, thought it was a fraud designed to win Floyd public approval, but he persisted after Patterson left the ring, which suggests it was not an act. Floyd's finances during his years in New Paltz were often tight, contrary to what sports columnists reported, in large part because of his generosity. Floyd never could say no to a cause he thought was worthy, said his longtime upstate friend Bill O'Hare. Floyd would then go on to serve twice on the New York State Athletic Commission Board, the last time as a chairman. During his term as chairman, however, it became apparent that Floyd was experiencing some sort of mental decline. Thomas Hauser, an attorney and author, spoke to Patterson at a reception in 1995. Hauser had interviewed Patterson for a Muhammad Ali biography a few years earlier, but Floyd seemed to have changed between the time of the interview and the night of the reception. Floyd had become one of those guys who could talk about things that happened years ago, but couldn't remember what he ate for breakfast, Hauser said. Hauser believed that as time went on, the Athletic Commission office functioned incompetently because of Floyd's diminished state. Floyd's cognitive difficulties became painfully apparent in 1998. As the Commission's chairman, Patterson was given a videotaped deposition concerning mixed martial arts contests, which were banned in New York at the time. As the attorneys representing the MMA interest grilled him, Floyd's memory collapsed. Among other lapses, Patterson couldn't remember beating Archie Moore for the championship in 1956. It got to the point where Floyd couldn't even remember his secretary's name. Patterson blamed his miserable performance on lack of sleep, but it was obvious something much more serious than that was going on. The damage was done. Patterson had to resign his post, and he retreated to New Paltz, where an Associated Press reporter tracked him down a few months later. Patterson refused to discuss the disastrous deposition with the reporter, but his face crumples when the subject is raised. Friends say what hurts him the most is feeling that he let the governor down. Floyd steadily became further lost in dementia's fog as the old millennium played out and the new one began. Prostate cancer also afflicted him. The old champ, who prided himself on being the boxer who got back on his feet more than any other, was finally floored for good on May the 11th, 2006. He was 71 years old. Patterson's death received significant coverage. Most accounts eulogised him as a gentleman in a sport in which gentlemen are rare indeed, noted the rivalry with Ali, the Liston disasters, the triumph over Johansson, but some commentators mined his contributions more deeply. One was Gregory Kane, an African-American sports columnist for the Baltimore Sun. Kane weighed in on the accusations that Floyd exhibited Uncle Tom-like behaviour. He wrote that Patterson's decision to fight Sonny Liston had showed he was a man of integrity, not an Uncle Tom. It sounds like a man who would stand for what is right, not just what's convenient. That sounds like a man we should have more of these days. I'd wager Ali appreciates him now. Others argued that Patterson's boxing skills were underappreciated, none more so than Floyd's friend light heavyweight champ Jose Torres, who said in an NPR interview, "You know, he knew that he was a good fighter, but he never spoke about it. And if he was champion, he had to know he was the best." The man who had to know he was the best was laid to rest in the New Paltz Rural Cemetery, his headstone engraved with "A champion, always." And I'm going to leave the end of this story with one final quote from Floyd Patterson. He says, "It's easy to do anything in victory. It's in defeat that a man truly reveals himself." And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of the life and career profile of Floyd Patterson. It's been an unbelievable tale of a man who I feel is truly underappreciated in terms of boxing history. I know there's a lot of hardcore boxing fans, boxing historians, sports writers, journalists, whoever, that do appreciate what Floyd brought to the table. And it's by doing this career profile on Floyd Patterson that I've learned much, much more about him as an individual, much more about the intricacies of his boxing career, and learning some of the things he stood up for in his life and his career. And I've got to say, I appreciate him more than I've ever appreciated another fighter before learning about them, because some fighters are more revered in the history of this sport. You hear so much more about the likes of Muhammad Ali, even Mike Tyson, of course, who's still with us. You hear more about him than you do about the likes of Floyd Patterson, who really, he was a pioneer in this sport, in this heavyweight division. Yes, you had Rocky Marciano before him. Yes, you had Joe Louis. Yes, you had Jack Johnson and Jack Dempsey. You had all these fighters that came before him. But at the time he lived through, the era that he went through as heavyweight champion, the difficulties he faced, what it was like being in America during those times, like, we can't understand it being UK based because we haven't dealt with that sort of adversity. There has been adverse moments in UK history, but I haven't lived through any major ones, and some of my family haven't lived through major ones. So for someone like him to have lived through that in a time where you couldn't even sit on a bus with white people must have been very, very difficult, must have been incredibly difficult. And I can never understand that, and I never will. But to hear stories of it, to hear how people came back and used their status to push back against it and help try and make change in some way, shape or form, was something I learned a lot about with Floyd Patterson. His career as a heavyweight champion, it might always be defined in some people's eyes by losses to Sonny Liston. But I think his trilogy that we did with Ingemar Johansson on Legendary Nights and this career profile truly depicts a real fighter, a real gentleman, a real man, and a heavyweight fighter in history who should be revered more than what I believe he is in this current generation. So I hope that I've been able to bring that to you by presenting his story over these 4 parts. If you've enjoyed the whole tale and the whole career and the legendary story of Floyd Patterson, it's always fantastic to hear that from you. So please let me know on Spotify. You can comment on the episode when it's live. You can let me know what you think of the whole thing. You can let me know if there's any parts of the story that you might not like, or there's parts of the story that might be contrary to what you've heard. Bearing in mind, there's been some wonderful, wonderful sources. The 2 Floyd Patterson autobiographies were inspiring sources, of course, for this particular episode. Associated Press news articles, various written articles across the internet were all really, really good sources to be able to put this story together on Floyd Patterson, and I must give them a big, big thank you. So if you've heard any notes or any quotes that have come out of a particular article or a particular book, it's because they were great inspirational pieces of work that are already out there to allow me to put this episode together and present to you a full and true depiction of what Floyd Patterson's life and career was all about. Again, if you've enjoyed it, let us know on Spotify or on any of the podcasting apps out there that has a ratings and comment system. If you're listening to this on YouTube, thank you so much for bearing with and listening to it. I know it's a little bit more painstaking doing it on YouTube than a podcasting app. It's not as easy to do it through YouTube as it is a podcasting app. So I do appreciate it when you guys put comments on and enjoy the episodes. And thank you to those that have already done it in previous parts. But that is it for this particular episode and this career profile. Of course, I will be back shortly with another episode on another great legendary figure from this sport, split into multiple parts, of course, and I hope you do enjoy that also. But let's just take a moment to remember what an absolute legendary fighter and an impactful human being that Floyd Patterson was on this sport. Thank you so much for listening to the life and the career profile of Floyd Patterson on the BTR Boxing Podcast Network.
In a boxing ring, where legends shine. From John L. Sullivan to Joe Louis Divine, they fought with valor in that golden light, bobbing and weaving, fearless in the fight. The crowd's roar echoed through the air, every punch thrown a story to share, a ballad of courage with every round, in the heart of boxing where legends are crowned. Sugar Ray Leonard, swift on his feet, dancing on canvas to the rhythmic beat, float like a butterfly, handle the heat. Ali's charisma making the victory sweet. Rocky Marciano, undefeated in might, where history collides with sheer delight. With every punch thrown in the heat of the fray, celebrating lives in the boxing way. So plug in your headphones, tales untold of fighters who've dared to be bold. Champions' voices weaving threads so tight, tales within tales ringing into the night.